I pray you dead. My sister said it for 7 years. At her wedding, the photographer played the audio evidence to the crowd. Groom left at the altar. Madeline, my younger sister, started wishing I were dead when she was 15 and I was 18. Not in fury during fights, just casually regarding the weather. She'd say, "Wouldn't it be nice if I just didn't exist?" When I entered the kitchen, Mom told her to stop being dramatic, but never disciplined her. Dad said she was going through a period and I needed to step up. The phase lasted 7 years. Madeline called me at college to tell she had a dream I died and woke up disappointed. She informed my party guests that the world would be better off without me when I graduated nursing school. Madeline stated she was honest about her sentiments when my aunt inquired why she said something so awful. She wished on the turkey wishbone that I'd disappear forever at Christmas, loud enough for Granny to hear. Madeline laughed and said it was sibling rivalry while Grandma clutched her chest. When I engaged to Evan, Madeline advised him to do better and wish I died before the wedding so he could find someone better. Evan was stunned and unsure what to say. Madeline claimed she was guarding him against error. Every Sunday, my parents invited us to dinner, and Madeline spent the whole meal detailing ways I may die that week. Monday car accident, Tuesday food illness, Wednesday falling downstairs. She ate Mom's pot roast while presenting it as a weather prediction. Mom protested monthly, but Dad said ignoring her was best. I stopped coming to dinners but felt guilty about leaving family. My hospitalization for appendicitis was the worst. Madeline arrived and told the nurse she hoped this was it. Madeline stated she'd been waiting for me to die for years and thought this was her time when the nurse inquired what she meant. My parents felt I was harsh for not letting my sister visit during a medical emergency, but the nurse phoned security and removed Madeline. When I tried no contact, my parents stated I was tearing the family apart over words. Just words. Like hearing your sister wish for your death 3 times a week for 7 years wasn't enough. They stated Madeline was jealous I was older and more accomplished and should feel sorry for her. Being sympathetic to someone who wished me dead drained me. After becoming engaged to Lucas, Madeline needed me. It would seem horrible without her only sister as a bridesmaid, so she wanted me. She asked me to help plan since I just got married. She wanted my vendor discount because I worked with their cousin at the hospital. She expected me to celebrate her life milestone after years of wishing me dead. I agreed to be a bridesmaid but had other intentions. Madeline's death wishes were usually spoken to relatives. She managed her stranger image well. But she didn't know Claire, her wedding photographer, was my patient's daughter. Claire's mom was my favorite cancer patient, and we became close. Claire offered a friends and family discount for my wedding, and we kept in touch. Claire called me immediately after receiving Madeline's wedding booking, knowing the last name. Claire had her recorder going during the engagement photo session. She caught Madeline saying she wished I'd died before getting engaged. She recorded Madeline saying she'd save on a bridesmaid dress if I died before the wedding. She had Madeline tell Lucas she prayed I'd disappear forever every night. Lucas uneasily quipped that was dark. But Madeline insisted she was serious. Claire recorded the rehearsal dinner and heard Madeline's toast, in which she claimed she was delighted I was alive to watch her happiness since I'd never have a marriage this perfect. My parents smiled sweetly. Claire kept recording as Madeline whispered she still wanted me dead but needed me to grin for photos tomorrow. Claire had everything ready for the wedding. She invited Madeline to check her best photos before the event. On her camera screen, she played the compilation loud enough for the wedding party. Madeline wished me dead 17 times, according to her pals. Lucas's relatives heard her say she'd celebrate my death. She told me she imagined my funeral, the clergyman heard. While applying Madeline's lipstick, the makeup artist heard everything. Silence filled the room. I saw Richard reach into his jacket pocket for his phone, while Lucas's parents sat 2 chairs away from Madeline. He kept his hand wrapped around something and his eyes on Claire's camera screen. Elaine clutched his arm with both hands, her knuckles turning white as Madeline said she'd save money on my bridesmaid outfit if I died. Elaine's cheeks lost color so fast I thought she may faint. She leaned against her husband and murmured, "Call it off." Richard nodded sharply for the last time. He took his phone out of his pocket and scrolled through contacts while the collection played. Nobody opposed him. He was ignored save for Elaine, who held her death grasp on his arm like she was holding herself up. The makeup artist hesitantly left her station with her brushes, eyes wild as Madeline's recorded voice said she'd celebrate if I died in a car accident. Brooke appeared transfixed near the dress rack, one hand covering her mouth and the other limp at her side. She stared at Madeline like she'd never seen her before, like the wedding dress-wearing stranger had her closest friend's face. The other bridesmaids muttered together near the door, heads lowered. I heard words like always new and false and poor girl floating across the room. They continued staring at Madeline with disgust, then at me with pity or shock. Madeline stood stationary in her white dress in the center of the room, except for her hands, which kept opening and shutting. Her expression changed so quickly it was hard to track. First shock, jaw flying open, eyes bulging. She clenched her jaw and turned red in wrath. Then terror as she looked around the room and saw everyone watching, judging, and seeing her as she was for the first time. The rehearsal dinner tape showed Madeline telling Lucas she prayed every night that I'd disappear forever. Madeline charged Claire with her hands, threatening to grab the camera. She screamed that Claire had manipulated everything and it was phony. High and frantic, her voice cracked on the words. I was surprised by how quickly the makeup artist blocked the camera between Madeline and Claire. She gestured like she was soothing a dangerous animal and took modest steps backward to keep Madeline from the equipment. The makeup artist kept her place between the bride and the camera despite her pale complexion and shaking hands. Claire kept the camera steady behind her and played the compilation for everyone. Madeline tried to get past the makeup artist, but she remained firm, and something about being terrified of her stopped her. She stood there gasping, her chest heaving under the white lace. Lucas stood still near the window. He had a pale, almost colorless face and quivering hands as he grabbed the window frame. He opened his mouth twice before speaking. He finally spoke, but his voice was so soft everyone had to struggle to hear him. He questioned Madeline whether anything was true. Just 6 words, but they bombed the room. Madeline whirled toward him so swiftly, her dress fluttered over her legs. She began rambling that I was being theatrical and misinterpreting everything. She claimed it was sibling rivalry, that all sisters talked like way, and that I was overreacting. Her voice was off. To her, I knew. It was hollow and thin, like reading lines she didn't believe. Lucas stared at her, waiting, and Madeline kept talking faster to fill the silence with meaningless justifications. My mother ran forward, her shoes clicking loudly. She was doing her damage control voice, used when Madeline did something wrong and mom needed to fix it. She assured everyone that sisters say things they don't mean, that this was a major misunderstanding, and that families are complicated. My father constantly stood behind her, nodding to her words. He started to agree with her, saying Madeline was simply going through a phase, and everyone should relax. Richard stopped him mid-sentence. His voice was cold and biting, unlike the rehearsal dinner's polite small talk. He questioned about 7-year phases. My dad's mouth was open but silent. Richard rose up from his chair, phone in hand, and gazed at my parents like germs on his shoe. He'd heard enough and wanted to make some calls, and his tone made it apparent they were about canceling everything. All along, the pastor had watched from the door with his hands clasped. He quietly cleared his throat and said he needed time to pray and decide if he could conduct this event correctly. Though polite, everyone understood his meaning. He finished. He left the bridal suite without replying. His shoes made subtle sounds on the carpet until the door closed and silenced them. The resulting hush was immense. There was no wedding without him. Everyone knew. People were doing the arithmetic and recognizing this was falling apart right now. Madeline called out like a broken animal and cried before the ceremony. Not pretty, movie-style tears. Ugly crying with crimson cheeks and black makeup streaks. Her entire body shook. I stood against the wall in the back of the room, where I'd been all along, ready to disappear. Every event felt weird and remote, like I was watching someone else. I felt so relieved that finally someone saw what I've been living with. But another part of me was astonished at how quickly Madeline's beautiful day was unraveling. I wanted everyone to know the truth, but I hadn't considered beyond that moment. I hadn't imagined everyone gazing, Madeline crying, and the wedding stopping. Evan grasped my hand, and I jumped when I realized he was next to me. When he entered the room was unknown. He must have sneaked up to me during the chaos. He held my hand without saying a word, his presence firm and real when everything else felt out of control. Danielle approached me gently, like she was handling something precious. She stopped a few steps away and stared at me with teary eyes. She apologized for not speaking out sooner after seeing how Madeline treated me. She had a harsh voice. She believed the bachelorette party comments were drunk meanness, like when people say things when they're drunk and lose their filters. After 7 years of hearing all those recordings and Madeline wished me dead in so many ways, she became physically ill. She put one hand on her stomach like she would vomit. She claimed she should have known it was more than party banter. Pattern should have been seen. Should have spoken up. I nodded because I didn't know what to say. To say what? She was right. Elaine left Richard and immediately approached my parents. She stood in front of them, forcing them to look at her. No turning away or ignoring her. She inquired how they let one daughter torture another for nearly 8 years. The query was calm but forceful, with clear words. My mother explained like she'd done it 1,000 times. She stated Madeline was jealous, she lacked empathy, and being the little sister was challenging. Elaine stopped her. She called that enabling abuse, not parenting. The term abuse lingered. No one had used that word. My parents usually dubbed it sibling rivalry, drama, or Madeline's phase. Elaine said abuse, and they realized it was always abuse. My father stared at the floor and my mother turned red. Elaine continued. She stated her son deserved a loving wife, not someone who spent years wishing family members dead. Madeline gripped Lucas's arms with both hands, digging into his sleeves. She begged him to look at her, remember she loved him, and remember this was their special day. Her anxious voice was high and rambling. She said they arranged everything, everyone was here, and they were getting married immediately. Lucas slowly removed her hands from his arms, unwinding her fingers. He claimed he needed time to consider marrying someone who wanted their sister dead for 7 years. After Madeline's screaming and wailing, his calm, quiet voice made things worse. He was done, not angry. He moved away from her and Madeline reached for him again, but he backed up until he was gone. I watched her face as she realized that her wedding day was ruined before it even started as she stood there with her arms frozen in place. Brooke moved first. She retreated from Madeline like she'd found something bad and declared she couldn't be honorable longer. The words were flat and final. She couldn't support someone who uttered those nasty things. 2 more bridesmaids grabbed their purses silently. They approached the door without looking at Madeline. The updo left one with bobby pins in her hair. That's impossible now. They left. The door closed behind them, sounding louder than expected. Margaret entered seconds later. She looked around at Madeline's tears, my mother's red face, and the table's abandoned bouquets. Someone near the mirror informed her fast. Margaret's face changed when she heard about the tapes. Her mouth and eyes tightened. She stared at my parents for a long time. She said she'd tried to inform them years ago. She said she told them Madeline's behavior was abnormal but they ignored her. My father responded, but Margaret held up one hand and he stopped. Her disappointment seemed worse than fury. Madeline turned to me, infuriated, and screamed that I'd wrecked everything. I ruined her wedding and life, she said. Her voice broke on the final word. Spit flew from her mouth. Even though my heart was racing, I maintained cool. Told her I didn't spoil anything. I let them hear her own words. I reminded her she said those things for 7 years. My voice was calm. That enraged her more. A makeup artist packed her brushes into their case. She moved quickly to escape. Other sellers followed her. Somebody unplugged the lights. Another person rolled up their photo backdrop. The room was filled with zippers and latches closing. Claire approached me. She held her camera lower but ready. I saw she was between me and Madeline in case things became physical. Not being shocked that my sister may hurt me was surprising. Richard approached Lucas and touched his shoulder. They shifted near the window away from others. Richard's mouth moved, and Lucas nodded. Lucas listened through tears. His father's hand never left his shoulder. Richard seemed to be expressing something vital. Lucas wiped his eyes with his back. They waited for what felt like ages but was probably 3 or 4 minutes. My mother tried again to mend everything. She advised everyone take a break and return in an hour. She stated emotions were high and people needed to settle down. Elaine stopped her. She spoke with an icy voice. She stated time would not erase what everyone heard. She believed her son deserved better than to marry someone so dark. The words lingered. Despite her redder face, my mother didn't answer. Madeline fell into a chair. The white puddle of her bridal dress surrounded her. Black mascara ran down both cheeks. She stared blankly. She stared at me. Her look was odd. Combination of wrath and despair. She seemed to grasp the situation. I guess she knew that words could ruin her plans. She opened her mouth but said nothing. Evan leaned beside my ear. He murmured, asking whether I was okay and wanted to leave. His hand gripped mine, shaking my head. I requested to stay. I needed to finish this. After 7 years of silence and being the greater person, I needed to see what happened when the truth came out. Yes. Evan stayed with me. I felt grounded in his presence. Lucas returned from talking to his father. He slowly approached Madeline across the room. Seeing him, everyone quieted. His stop was a few steps from her chair. He refused to marry her today. Maybe never. Though shaking, his words were clear. He stated he wanted time to consider whether the person he thought he knew existed. He suggested she'd always hidden her brutality behind a beautiful facade. He retreated when Madeline grabbed for him. Madeline begged. She pulled Lucas's sleeves to get him to look at her. She vowed to change. She vowed never to say that again. These remarks came out quickly and desperate. Lucas softly removed her hands from his. One by one, he unwrapped her fingers. He stated it didn't matter if she repeated it again. The trouble was that she'd repeated it hundreds of times over 7 years. Her problem was that she never saw anything wrong. He said that was the most crucial part because it was. My father moved forward after clearing his throat. He stated Madeline was young and made errors but deserved forgiveness. His voice was dismissive like it had been for 7 years while encouraging me to grow up. Added, everyone says things they don't mean when they're emotional, and we shouldn't judge her too harshly for words spoken in private moments. The room was quiet while he spoke. He saw Lucas's family as if they agreed with him. Richard looked at my father with a new face. His eyes were chilly and mouth stiff. Wishing someone dead wasn't a mistake. He remarked clearly, he believed it was a character fault that showed a person's true self behind their smile. He stated his son shouldn't have to question if his wife could love him or if she'd turn that darkness on him. He argued 7 years of intentional brutality was unjustified by youth or jealousy. Despite his red face, my father didn't answer. The silence was heavy and unsettling. Bridesmaids shuffled to the door. They continued looking at each other and Madeline. Their body language said they wanted to leave, but nobody had fired them. One girl shielded her chest with her bouquet. Another nervously adjusted her dress straps. They had to choose between their friend and the horror of what they'd heard. Brooke watched with arms folded. She approached the gathering and urged them to leave. Today's wedding was cancelled, she stated. Her voice was forceful and mournful. She stated they didn't have to stay. Bridesmaids fled the room. Their shoes clicked quickly down the hallway outside. The door closed softly behind them. The bridal suite felt empty and exposed without them. Claire approached me. She spoke softly with her camera bag on her shoulder. She requested copies of all recordings for my records. Her eyes were compassionate. Without thinking, I nodded yes. Something told me I'd need proof of this moment. Proof that I didn't imagine 7 years of cruelty. Evidence that people finally saw the truth, instead of dismissing it as sibling rivalry or my sensitivity. Claire took a small USB drive from her bag. She placed it in my palm, and closed my fingers. She whispered that she'd double-backed up everything in case. She said the files were date and location labeled. I gripped the USB drive tightly. It felt solid. Physical proof that I wasn't crazy or dramatic and that Madeline had casually wished me dead for 7 years while everyone pretended it was normal. Mom turned toward me. Her face was twisted with anger and panic. I was cruel and vindictive, she said. She said I planned this public humiliation to ruin Madeline's special day. Her voice strengthened with each word. I should be ashamed of planning this revenge, she said. She said I'd always envied Madeline's beauty and fame. Evan squeezed my hand, but I retreated. I had to do this alone. I told my mother I orchestrated nothing but letting people hear Madeline's words. I promised no commentary or editing. I just told the truth instead of hiding it at family dinners and private times. In my opinion, Madeline felt humiliated because of her behavior. I suggested she feel ashamed of wishing her sister dead for 7 years instead of me for revealing it. My mother opened and closed her mouth without speaking. Madeline rose from her seat. Her wedding dress rustled. She grabbed her veil with both hands. She ripped it off her head and threw it across the room. The veil fell to the floor in a white tulle puddle after hitting the wall. She screamed, I've always envied her. Raw and desperate, her voice. She said I ruined everything because I couldn't bear her happiness. I plotted this for months because I was bitter about my boring life, she said. She said I wanted to ruin her perfect day because mine wasn't. She rewrote history, making herself the victim and turning 7 years of death wishes into me being the jealous older sister who couldn't handle her success. Several Lucas relatives shifted uncomfortably. I could see them debating whether to believe her or the recordings. Evan stepped up. His movement was deliberate and calm. Reminding everyone was his goal. Despite his quiet voice, everyone heard him. He said Madeline told him directly to hope I die before our wedding so he can find a good wife. He said that wasn't misinterpreted. He said she eyed him and said those words at a family dinner while sober. He remembered every word despite being too shocked to respond. His testimony was credible because he was an outsider with no reason to lie or exaggerate. Many nodded slowly. There was recognition on their faces. They recalled other events from the past, small moments they dismissed as jokes or sibling rivalry. Now those moments formed a pattern they couldn't ignore. Lucas contacted his parents. He sounded exhausted and defeated. He requested departure. He requested assistance in canceling the reception and notifying guests. He spoke without looking at Madeline. Elaine took charge immediately. She made a list on her phone. Vendors and guests were her responsibility. She'd explained the wedding was postponed indefinitely due to a family emergency. She didn't say cancelled, but everyone knew indefinitely. Richard put his hand on Lucas's shoulder and offered to help him get his things from the groom's suite. He suggested they leave through the back to avoid arriving guests. Lucas nodded. He hadn't seen Madeline. His parents walked toward the door with him. They shielded their son. Witnessing their departure made me feel both relieved and sad. Margaret appeared at the door. She must have heard the commotion from her waiting spot. She quickly assessed the situation. Floor scattered bridesmaid bouquets. Madeline's veil crumbled against the wall. Pressured faces and Lucas leaving. She approached me and hugged me. She hugged me warmly and whispered her pride. Her voice was emotional. After 7 years of being told to take the high road, she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She regretted not protecting me more over the years. She said she'd seen the cruelty but let my parents convince her not to interfere. She was glad the truth was finally out in the open and couldn't be ignored or minimized. When I hugged her back, tears began. Validating my experience meant more than words. Lucas left with his parents. Madeline saw. Her eyes followed them to the door and hallway. I witnessed the exact moment it hit her. Realizing that her wedding was canceled, her relationship might be over, and all her planning and dreaming had fallen apart in less than an hour. Her face altered. The anger drained and made something weaker. She sank in her chair. An expensive wedding dress surrounded her like a white pool. She sat tiny and defeated. The perfect bride image shattered. She remained silent, staring at the floor. For the first time all day, she was silent. No casual death wish, no rewritten history, just silence and unexpected consequences. My mother tried again. She looked at me in tears. She claimed I ruined my sister's happiness. She said I split the family. Her accusatory voice shook. She advised me to address my concerns privately, rather than humiliating Madeline in public. Family members were supposed to protect each other, and I disappointed her. I felt different looking at her. I said Madeline spent 7 years wishing me dead 3 times a week to ruin my happiness. I said the family was split and everyone pretended not to notice. I told her coming to her privately hadn't worked because she'd spent 7 years telling me to be understanding while ignoring the abuse. I said, protecting each other should have begun when Madeline said she didn't want me. Mom weakly advised her to stop being dramatic without consequences. I stopped pretending everything was normal when it wasn't. Brooke looked at Madeline from the door. She felt betrayed and disgusted by what she heard. She said she'd defended Madeline many times when others called her fake. She said those people were right all along. Brooke left without replying. A soft click closed the door behind her, sounding louder than a slam. 2 more bridesmaids followed immediately. They grabbed their purses and bouquets and ran like the room was on fire. Madeline watched them leave, mouth open. She surveyed the remaining people, expecting someone to intervene. Nobody moved. Claire packed her camera gear. She carried lenses in padded bags and wrapped cords around her hands. Her movements were deliberate. She glanced at me and nodded. Her head movement was tiny but crucial. My throat tightened with emotion. Despite knowing me little, she exposed 7 years of cruelty. She recorded everything and played it at the right time. When no one believed me, she proved it. I couldn't thank her enough or say enough. My father approached me with hands out like a scared animal. I was asked if I was happy after ruining Madeline's wedding. He tried to control his anger with a tight voice. I broke my sister's heart and split the family, he said. Something broke when I saw him. Not satisfied, I told him. I told him I was tired. I said I spent 7 years being told to be bigger while Madeline wished me dead 3 times a week. I was relieved others now knew the truth. I was tired of alone having to understand, forgive, and take the high road. Father was red-faced. He started to argue, but Lucas appeared in the doorway. Lucas looked awful. He had red eyes and a loose tie. He went straight to Madeline without looking back. He said he'd call her after thinking for a few days. He said he couldn't look at her. His voice broke on the last word. Madeline grabbed his hand. She desperately grabbed his fingers. Lucas fled as if she burned him. Her face showed genuine rejection. She showed her first genuine emotion all day. Not the fake tears or rage. Real hurt was evident. After Lucas left again, the room felt smaller. My makeup artist approached slowly. She shielded herself with her bag. She claimed to have a sister. She said she couldn't imagine Madeline treating her like me. Her voice was gentle. She called me brave for telling the truth. She wished me peace now that people knew what I'd been through. My voice was scratchy when I thanked her. She gently squeezed my arm before leaving. Mom and Dad moved to the corner. They leaned in and whispered urgently. Watching them gesture and shake heads, they appeared anxious and furious. I realized they didn't care about me or Madeline. They tried to explain to friends and extended family why the wedding was canceled and protect their reputation. They worried about what others would think after 7 years of abuse at home. They spent 7 years telling me to be patient while ignoring Madeline. They minimized, dismissed, and enabled. Damage control was their only concern now that they were facing consequences. Madeline stood from her chair. Her wedding dress rustled as she approached. Her makeup was smeared and her fancy hair was falling out. Her first look at me since the recording. She asked why I would hurt her on her wedding day. Her emotional voice shook. No longer sure if it was real or performed. Said she did this to herself. I said 7 years of cruelty led to this. I just made sure people heard what she said when she thought only family was listening. Tired of being the only one who knew the truth. The Madeline face twisted. I was jealous and vindictive, she said. She said I hated seeing her happy. It was pointless to respond. No matter what I said, she'd rewrite history. Evan tapped my elbow. He advised leaving and letting my family deal with the aftermath. He said staying longer would lead to pointless arguments. I agreed because he was right. My task was completed. The truth emerged. People heard Madeline's words. Staying would mean hearing my parents defend her and blame me. We approached the door. I was called by my mother. She banned me from family events if I caused drama. Her voice was cold and sharp. I looked back at her. I told her no problem. I admitted to 7 years of family event abuse tolerance training. I stopped pretending everything was normal when it wasn't. My mother opened her mouth but said nothing. Claire left with us. She took a small USB drive from her camera bag. She gave me backups and said so. She suggested proving what happened. Held the drive tightly in my palm. Claire said goodbye with hugs. She told me to look after myself. My eyes burned with tears as she said, exposing abuse takes courage. Even when it feels like revenge. We strolled down the hall. I heard my mother's voice rising behind us. I could hear Madeline crying. I heard my father calming everyone. The sounds faded as we got farther away. Evan kept his hand on my back. Claire walked beside us until we reached the parking lot. She said goodbye one more time and headed to her car. Evan and I stood by our car for a minute. I looked back at the venue. It was supposed to be Madeline's perfect day. White flowers and elegant decorations and a ceremony in front of everyone she knew. Instead, it was cancelled. Her bridesmaids had left. Her groom had walked away. Her perfect image was shattered. I should have felt guilty. But I just felt tired. 7 years of casual cruelty. 7 years of death wishes. 7 years of being told to understand and forgive. I was done. Evan wrapped his arms around me in the parking lot and I started crying. 7 years of holding everything and came out all at once. My shoulders shook and I couldn't stop the tears from coming. Evan held me tighter and told me I did the right thing. He said he was proud of me for refusing to stay silent anymore. I knew the family consequences would be severe, but I couldn't bring myself to care in that moment. We stood there for several minutes while I cried and he rubbed my back. Other guests started arriving for the ceremony and they looked confused seeing us in the parking lot. Evan guided me to our car and helped me into the passenger seat. We sat there for a while before he started the engine. I watched more wedding guests arrive through the windshield. They walked toward the entrance in their fancy clothes, carrying wrapped presents. Some of them checked their phones looking confused. A few stood near the entrance talking to each other and gesturing. I felt guilty for a moment about disrupting everyone's plans. Then I remembered Madeline showing up at the hospital during my appendicitis. I remembered her telling the nurse she hoped this was finally it. The guilt disappeared. Evan started driving and asked how I was feeling. I admitted I didn't know yet. Part of me felt vindicated that people finally witnessed Madeline's cruelty. Another part felt guilty about the public humiliation, even though she brought it on herself. Evan reached over and squeezed my hand. He reminded me that I didn't create those recordings. I didn't make Madeline say those things. I just made sure people heard what she'd been saying when she thought only family was listening. My phone started buzzing in my purse. I pulled it out and saw text messages flooding in from family members. Margaret sent a message saying she was proud of me and I did what needed to be done. Several cousins sent angry messages. They said I went too far. They said I should have handled it privately. I stared at those messages thinking about 7 years of private suffering. 7 years of being told to be the bigger person. 7 years of death wishes at Sunday dinners. Private hadn't worked. Private meant everyone could pretend nothing was wrong. My phone kept buzzing with more messages. Some supportive, most angry. I turned it off and dropped it back in my purse. Evan glanced over and I told him I needed a few days away from everyone to process what just happened. He immediately suggested we go to his parents' lake house. Nobody could bother us there. I felt grateful for a partner who understood I needed space to decompress. We drove straight there without stopping at home first. The lake house sat on a quiet stretch of water surrounded by trees. Evan's parents rarely used it during summer, so we had it to ourselves. I spent the first day mostly sleeping. Evan brought me food and water, but didn't push me to talk. He sat beside me on the couch and held my hand. Sometimes he read while I stared out the window at the water. The emotional exhaustion from years of abuse and the intensity of finally exposing it hit me all at once. I couldn't process anything. I just needed to exist without thinking. The second day, I woke up feeling less numb. I sat on the deck overlooking the lake and started feeling more aware of what I'd done. I didn't regret exposing Madeline's cruelty. That felt right and necessary, but I recognized that I'd permanently damaged family relationships. There was no going back to how things were before. Evan brought me coffee and sat in the chair next to mine. We took a long walk around the lake and talked about what happens next. He reminded me that healthy families don't enable one member to abuse another for 7 years. He said, if my parents choose Madeline over accountability, that reveals who they've always been. I knew he was right, but it still hurt. When we got back to the house, I checked my email on Evan's laptop. I saw a long message from Lucas. My stomach clenched as I opened it. He thanked me for showing him who Madeline really is before he married her. He said he'd called off the engagement permanently. He couldn't trust someone who hid that much cruelty. He was grateful even though it hurt right now. Reading Lucas's email made me cry again. This time, the tears felt different. Relief, mixed with the sadness. At least one person understood I didn't do this out of spite. I wrote back thanking him for listening. I apologized that he had to learn the truth this way. I agreed he deserved better than someone who could wish death on family for 7 years. Evan read over my shoulder and wrapped his arms around me from behind. He kissed the top of my head and told me everything would be okay eventually. I leaned back against him and hoped he was right. The next morning at the lake house, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Margaret. I answered and she told me Madeline had been holed up in my parents' house for 4 days, barely leaving her bedroom. My mother was apparently furious with me and spent hours ranting about how I'd destroyed Madeline's special day. But my father had been quieter than usual, according to Margaret. She said he'd been sitting in his study staring out the window, and she wondered if he was finally starting to see how his years of dismissing Madeline's cruelty had led to this disaster. I thanked Margaret for checking on me, and we hung up. Evan brought me coffee on the deck, and I told him what Margaret had said. He nodded and said, maybe my father was beginning to understand, but that didn't fix 7 years of enabling. I agreed, and we spent the rest of the morning walking along the lake shore in comfortable silence. 3 days later, I got a message on social media from Danielle asking if we could meet for coffee. I hesitated, but something about her apology at the wedding felt genuine, so I agreed. We met at a small cafe near my apartment the following afternoon. Danielle looked nervous when I arrived, and immediately apologized again for not speaking up sooner. She told me she'd been thinking constantly about all the times she'd noticed Madeline being subtly cruel to me, but dismissed it as normal sister stuff. She said she felt guilty for not questioning why Madeline always made little digs at me or why I seemed uncomfortable at events. I stirred my coffee and listened as she talked about specific moments she now saw differently. The bachelorette party comment about me being alive to witness Madeline's happiness. The rehearsal dinner, where Madeline kept comparing our lives. Little comments over the years that Danielle had brushed off as sibling rivalry. I told Danielle she wasn't responsible for my family's problems. I said I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge what she'd seen, but she couldn't have fixed my parents' failure to protect me. Danielle nodded, but still looked troubled. She asked if I thought Madeline would ever change. I sat down my cup and considered the question. I told her honestly that I didn't know because change requires admitting you did something wrong, and Madeline still seemed convinced she was the victim in all this. Danielle agreed that Madeline's social media posts since the cancelled wedding had all been about betrayal and humiliation with no acknowledgement of her own behavior. We finished our coffee and Danielle hugged me goodbye, saying she hoped I found peace. I drove home feeling oddly lighter, having someone outside my immediate family validate what I'd experienced. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, an email appeared in my inbox from my mother. The subject line read, "Family Boundaries," and my stomach clenched as I opened it. The email was formal and cold, like she was writing to a business associate instead of her daughter. She said she and my father needed time and space before they could have a relationship with me again. She wrote that my actions at Madeline's wedding were unacceptable and caused unnecessary pain to the entire family. There was no mention of 7 years of death wishes. No acknowledgement of their failure to stop Madeline's cruelty. No recognition that I'd suffered at all. The email treated me like I was the problem, and they were the victims of my vindictive behavior. I read it 3 times feeling numb. I showed Evan the email when he got home from work. His face went red as he read and he actually raised his voice saying my parents were continuing to enable Madeline by punishing me for exposing abuse. He said they were choosing comfort over accountability, and it proved they'd never been willing to protect me. I agreed with him but felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. Their response confirmed I'd made the right choice. Nothing was going to change unless I forced the truth into the open. And even now they were choosing to blame me rather than face their own failures. Evan pulled me into a hug and I let myself feel relieved instead of guilty. I'd spent 7 years waiting for my parents to see what Madeline was doing, and now I knew they'd always chosen to look away. The following week, I made an appointment with a therapist. I sat in her office and explained 7 years of casual death wishes and my parents' enablement and the wedding disaster that finally exposed everything. The therapist listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she told me I wasn't wrong to protect myself. She said, "Exposing abuse isn't vindictive, even when it happens publicly." We spent the next several sessions working through my complicated feelings about losing my family, even though they'd been hurting me. She helped me understand that grief was normal, even when the relationship was toxic. I started processing years of emotional damage I'd been carrying while trying to be the bigger person. One evening, Evan and I were making dinner when he suddenly suggested we elope. He said we could skip all the family drama of a traditional wedding and just get married at the courthouse. I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at him. He was serious. I immediately said yes. We planned a simple courthouse ceremony with just his parents and Margaret invited. The day arrived, and I wore a simple white dress I'd bought the week before. Evan's parents brought flowers, and Margaret cried happy tears as we exchanged vows. The ceremony took 12 minutes and felt perfect because everyone there genuinely loved and supported us. No death wishes, no subtle cruelty, just people who wanted us to be happy. We had lunch at a nice restaurant afterward, and I felt more joy in those few hours than I'd felt at any family gathering in years. Margaret pulled me aside at the restaurant and told me privately she'd confronted my parents about their enabling behavior. She said they'd been defensive and insisted they'd done their best with a difficult situation. But Margaret had planted seeds of doubt, asking them hard questions about why they never punished Madeline or protected me. She didn't think they'd apologize anytime soon, because that would require admitting they'd failed as parents. But at least someone in the family was holding them accountable, and maybe eventually those seeds would grow into real understanding. I hugged Margaret and thanked her for being the one adult who'd consistently tried to help me. 4 months after the canceled wedding, Margaret called with news about Madeline. She said Madeline had started therapy at Lucas's insistence if she wanted any chance of reconciliation. I asked if Margaret thought Madeline was genuinely working on herself or just going through the motions to get Lucas back. Margaret admitted she didn't know, but said at least Madeline was facing some consequences for her behavior. I hung up, feeling uncertain about what it meant. Part of me hoped Madeline would actually change and recognize how much damage she'd caused, but another part doubted whether someone who'd casually wished me dead for 7 years could really transform into a better person. I opened social media that evening and scrolled through posts from extended family members. Passive-aggressive messages about forgiveness and family loyalty filled my feed. Cousins posting quotes about letting go of grudges, aunts sharing articles about the importance of family bonds. None of them mentioned 7 years of abuse or my parents' failure to protect me. They just wanted everything to go back to normal, which meant me accepting Madeline's cruelty in silence. I went through my contacts and blocked most of my extended family. The people who mattered already knew the truth. I was learning that protecting my peace mattered more than maintaining relationships with people who enabled abuse and expected me to keep quiet about it. Evan brought up the idea of moving while we were doing dishes one evening. He said his company had been offering remote work options and we could go anywhere. I looked at the soap plate in my hands and realized nothing was keeping us here except habit and pain. I told him I could find nursing work in any city and we should start looking at places far enough away that surprise family visits wouldn't be possible. We spent that weekend researching cities 4 or more hours away, making lists of places with good hospitals and lower costs of living. Evan pulled up apartment listings, and I calculated commute times to potential jobs. We talked about starting over somewhere nobody knew our history or expected us to play happy family at Sunday dinners. Within 3 weeks, we had narrowed it down to 4 cities and scheduled visits to each one. The planning gave me something positive to focus on instead of replaying family drama or wondering if my parents would ever acknowledge what they'd allowed to happen. Margaret called every few days to check on me, and our conversations became the only family contact I maintained. She listened when I needed to vent about my mother's cold email or my father's silence. She validated my feelings instead of asking me to understand Madeline's perspective or give my parents more chances. One afternoon, she came over for coffee and admitted she should have done more years ago when she first noticed how Madeline treated me. She said she'd confronted my parents a few times, but backed down when they got defensive, and she regretted not pushing harder or offering me a place to stay away from the toxicity. I told her she was the only family member who ever tried to help. And that meant everything. She promised she'd stay in my life no matter what my parents decided, that I deserved family who actually acted like family, instead of people who shared DNA but enabled abuse. 8 months after the canceled wedding, I got a message from Lucas through social media. He said he wanted to update me that he and Madeline were officially done, that he'd ended things permanently after she kept making excuses in therapy instead of taking real responsibility. He thanked me again for showing him the truth before he married someone who could hide that much cruelty behind a sweet smile. He mentioned he was dating someone new, a woman who treated service workers with genuine kindness and never said cruel things, even as jokes. The contrast had shown him what he almost settled for, and he was grateful even though learning the truth had been painful. I wrote back thanking him for letting me know and saying I was glad he found someone better. His message made me feel less guilty about the wedding disaster because at least one person understood I hadn't done it out of spite, but out of desperate need for someone besides family to finally witness what I'd been dealing with. I realized one morning that I hadn't thought about Madeline's death wishes in weeks. I was pouring coffee, and the thought just appeared. This awareness that the constant background anxiety was gone. For 7 years, I'd lived with this low-grade dread, wondering when she'd say the next cruel thing or what creative way she'd wish me dead. I'd walk into family gatherings braced for impact, never knowing if she'd keep it subtle or say something so horrible even my parents couldn't ignore it. But now I just existed without that weight pressing on my chest every day. I could make plans without factoring in potential family drama or calculating how to avoid Madeline at events. The freedom felt strange and guilty at first, like I shouldn't feel this relieved about losing my family. But the relief kept growing anyway because peace turned out to be worth more than blood relations who made me feel worthless. Evan and I moved 5 months later to a city neither of us had ever lived in before. We rented a small house with a backyard and spent weekends exploring neighborhoods and finding our favorite coffee shop. I started a new nursing job at a hospital where nobody knew about my family drama or expected me to explain why my sister wasn't in my life. Evan set up his home office, and we established routines that had nothing to do with Sunday dinners or holiday obligations. We made friends through work in a local board game group. People who chose to spend time with us because they enjoyed our company. We hosted dinners where everyone brought food and stayed late playing games and laughing about nothing important. I learned what healthy relationships felt like, how it felt to be around people who didn't make casual comments about wishing I didn't exist. Every dinner party reminded me that I'd made the right choice even though it cost me my immediate family. Margaret visited 18 months after the canceled wedding, driving 4 hours to see our new place and meet our new friends. She walked through our little house, admiring how we decorated and set things up exactly how we wanted without considering anyone else's opinions. That evening, after our friends left from a game night, Margaret told me she was proud of how I'd built a life focused on people who respected and valued me. She said watching me laugh freely with friends who genuinely cared about me showed her that I'd made the right choice. I realized, sitting there, that exposing the truth had cost me my parents and sister, cost me the extended family who valued peace over justice. Cost me the fantasy that my family would ever acknowledge what happened or apologize. But it gave me freedom from constant cruelty. Gave me peace without wondering what horrible thing would be said next. Gave me the chance to surround myself with people who would never casually wish me dead over pot roast. The trade was worth every difficult moment because I'd chosen my own well-being over family loyalty. And that choice had led me here, to this small house filled with real love instead of obligatory tolerance. My mom slapped me for asking about my own donation. 3 days later, her pastor called me demanding $10,000. So I took her down, with one legal letter. Hello, I'm Lena, and last Easter Sunday, my mother smacked me across the face in front of our entire extended family for refusing to write another check to her church. However, that wasn't the worst part. 3 days later, Pastor Reed called me personally, not to inquire about my well-being, but to inquire about when I would be reinstating my $15,000 annual contribution to the building fund. That's when I realized my mother had been using my money to establish herself as the most generous family at Grace Community Church for the previous 6 years. I never expected that sticking up for myself would lead to the discovery of a web of falsehoods that stretched over my entire life. However, the folks who raised you to be good are often the ones who take advantage of your goodness. As I drove into my parents' home on Easter Sunday morning in Riverside, Ohio, the March air still had the bite of winter. Mom has been messaging since 7 a.m. about arriving early to assist with the ham, but I suspected it was more about making sure I looked nice before the rest of the family came. My Honda Civic appeared humble next to Dad's newly washed Silverado and Clara's dazzling Audi SUV, which were already parked in the circular drive. I pulled the store-bought dinner rolls from my passenger seat, fully expecting Mom to say something about how she had been up since dawn, cooking everything from scratch. The front door was unlocked, as is customary on family gathering days, and the aroma of brown sugar and cloves hit me the instant I went inside. Classical music wafted from the kitchen, accompanied by the sound of pots clattering and Mom's voice directing traffic. The Mitchell family home on Maple Street had not changed much since I was a child. The same beige walls are lined with family photos in similar gold frames. The same burgundy carpet that revealed every trace of lint. The same formal living room that no one was allowed to live in. Clara's laughter could be heard from the kitchen. She was undoubtedly already Mom's favorite helper, while I was invariably tasked with setting the table or folding napkins. Mom emerged in the hallway wearing her best Easter dress, a navy blue outfit with pearl buttons that she had purchased specifically for church this morning. Her hair was groomed in exquisite waves, and her makeup looked professional. She drew me into a hug that felt more like a performance than love, the kind where she could whisper instructions without anybody else listening. "Lena, honey, you look tired. Did you remember to bring the offering envelope I gave you last week?" She whispered into my ear. "Pastor Reed mentioned the building fund is still short for this quarter." I drew back, little perplexed. "Mom, I already set up the automatic transfer for this year. The first payment went through last month." I had certainly planned for my yearly $15,000 donation to be divided into quarterly payments, something I had begun doing 3 years ago to better manage my nonprofit salary. Her smile tightened almost subtly. "Well, yes, but there are always additional opportunities to give. The church is doing such important work, and our family has always been known for its generosity." She took my elbow and led me to the kitchen. "Come say hello to everyone." Clara brought the most beautiful flowers. The kitchen was filled with typical pandemonium. Dad stood near the coffee pot in his Sunday khakis and button-down shirt, his hair still showing comb marks from this morning's church service. Clara arranged white lilies in a crystal vase, her movements precise and beautiful. She looked up as we arrived, her grin warm but calculated. "Lena, perfect timing. I was just telling Mom about Eric's promotion. He's going to be managing the entire Northeast region now." Clara's husband Eric emerged from the pantry holding a bottle of wine. His fine watch caught the light as he extended his hand for the customary polite handshake. "Congratulations," I responded, actually meaning it, despite the simmering competition between Clara and me. "That's really exciting." "Thanks. We're actually looking at houses in the Riverside Heights area now. You know, something with more space for when we start a family." Clara's hand rested on her flat stomach in a seemingly rehearsed position. "Of course, we want to stay close to the church. Community is so important." This announcement made Mom happy. "Isn't that wonderful? Clara and Eric understand the value of putting down roots, being part of something bigger than themselves." The suggestion lingered in the air like the aroma of ham. I lived downtown in a leased loft, went to church occasionally, and at 28, showed no signs of settling down with the type of man Mom might brag about at church social gatherings. I kept myself busy organizing the dinner rolls in a basket, attempting to avoid the usual sting of being found lacking. I didn't disagree with the value of community, but Grace Community Church had always seemed more like a social climbing opportunity than a spiritual home. The church was wealthy, primarily white, and appeared to prioritize charity giving as a status symbol over practical work. "Lena's been so generous to the church too," Mom began abruptly, her voice carrying that special tone she used when she wanted everyone to pay attention. "Haven't you, honey? Pastor Reed was just telling me how much he appreciates your family's commitment to the building fund." Something in her phrase made me pause. "Your family's obligation, not yours." I looked at her, but she had already moved on, inspecting the ham in the oven with theatrical care. Uncle Henry came 20 minutes later, accompanied by his wife and my cousin Nora, plus 2 additional carloads of family I had only seen on vacations and funerals. The house was filled with the happy noise that comes from people who love each other, but don't always like each other very much. Everyone assembled in the dining room, where Mom had set the table with her wedding china and excellent silver that needed to be hand-washed. His words were, "Grace, thanking God for family, for blessings, and for the opportunity to give back to the community that had given us so much." The amens resonated around the table, and the subject turned to pot roast and glazed carrots. Uncle Henry discussed how his landscaping business was picking up for the spring. Nora presented updates about her nursing program. Eric dominated much of the talk, telling stories about his new job and their house-searching travels. I found myself largely listening, contributing when specifically requested, but feeling strangely removed from the entire event. There was a performative quality to it all, as if we were all playing roles we had been assigned long before. Clara was the successful daughter who had the ideal marriage. I was the artistic one who had yet to figure out her life. Mom and Dad were the community's pillars of generosity and respect. "Lena, Nora was asking about your job at the nonprofit," Mom added, bringing me back into the discussion. "Tell her about the work you're doing with homeless families." I smiled at Nora, delighted to be discussing something I was genuinely interested in. "We're working on a new program to help families transition from temporary housing into permanent situations. It's challenging, but really rewarding when you see someone get back on their feet. That's so admirable, Nora replied. It must be hard though, seeing all that need up close. It is, but it's also inspiring. People are so resilient when they're given real support, instead of just charity that makes the giver feel good. The remarks came out more pointed than I had intended, and I noticed Mom's stern glare across the table. Well, charity is important too, Eric remarked. I mean, without people willing to give generously, organizations like yours couldn't function. Absolutely, I agreed. I just think it's important that the giving actually helps people, instead of just making the donors feel better about themselves. An awkward quiet fell over the table. Uncle Henry cleared his throat and asked Dad about the upcoming busy season at the hardware store. The subject changed smoothly to business and weather forecasts, but I could see Mom's disdain emanating from her end of the table. Mom stopped me in the kitchen after dinner, as the men gathered in the living room to chat baseball and the women began clearing dishes. Clara was at the sink, methodically rinsing plates, but I could see she was paying attention. Lena, I need to talk to you about something, Mom whispered quietly. Pastor Reed mentioned that there might be some confusion about your donation this year. I placed down the serving platter that I had been drying. What kind of confusion? Well, apparently the amount that came through was less than what the church was expecting based on previous years. Mom's voice had taken on that cautious, measured tone she used when she was going to ask for something she knew I didn't want to give. Mom, I gave the same amount I give every year, $15,000, just split into quarterly payments instead of one lump sum. Clara looked away from the sink, her demeanor perfectly neutral. Maybe there was a banking error or something. I don't think so, I replied softly. I can check my bank statements, but I'm pretty sure everything went through correctly. Mom sighed, full of maternal disappointment. The thing is, honey, the church really needs that money for the new fellowship hall. Construction costs have gone up, and Pastor Reed is counting on our family's continued support. Our family's support? Well, yes, the Mitchell family has always been known for our generosity. Your father and I have been giving to the church for 30 years, and when you started contributing, it really meant something to Pastor Reed. It showed that our values were being passed down. I felt something chilly settle into my gut. Mom, are you saying that the church thinks Dad is the one making my donations? The hush lasted too long. Clara had become very still at the sink, and Mom's face had assumed the smooth, blank expression she used when she was prepared to lie. It's not about who gets the credit, Lena. It's about the family being seen as united in our commitment to the church. But I write the checks. My name is on the donation forms. Yes, but you use our address, since you move around so much. And Pastor Reed knows you're our daughter, so naturally he associates it with our family's overall giving. The parts were beginning to fit together in a way that made me feel sick. Mom, does Pastor Reed think that you and Dad are giving $25,000 a year instead of 10? Her cheeks reddened slightly. I don't see why the specific breakdown matters. What matters is that Grace Community is receiving support from faithful families. It matters because it's my money. And if people think it's coming from you, then you're getting credit for my generosity. My voice grew louder, and I could see Clara casting worrisome glances toward the dining room, where the rest of the family was still gathering. Don't be so dramatic, Lena. No one's stealing anything from you. We're all part of the same family, working toward the same goals. Are we? Because it seems like you've been letting people think you're more generous than you actually are, using my donations to boost your reputation at church. Mom's expression tightened. That is completely unfair. Your father and I have been faithful members of Grace Community since before you were born. We raised you to understand the importance of giving back. If you're suddenly concerned about getting personal recognition for your donations, maybe you need to examine your motives. The accusation landed like a smack. Here I was, trying to figure out why my donations were being credited to my parents, while I was being accused of having selfish reasons. This isn't about recognition, I responded, my tone taut with repressed rage. This is about honesty. If Pastor Reed thinks our family is giving $25,000 a year and you're not correcting that impression, then you're lying. How dare you accuse me of lying? Mom's voice had become dangerously quiet. After everything we've done for you, all the values we've tried to instill, this is how you talk to your mother. Clara turned away from the sink, her hands still soaking. Maybe we should all just calm down. It's Easter, and family is more important than money. It's not about the money, I emphasized. It's about the principle. The principle? Mom's voice rose now. The principle is that you support your family and your church without keeping score. The principle is that you're grateful for the blessings you've received instead of acting like some kind of victim. I'm not acting like a victim. I'm asking for honesty about where my money is going and who's getting credit for it. Your money? Mom repeated the words as if they were unpleasant. Everything you have because your father and I raised you right, sent you to college, supported you when you decided to work for pennies at some nonprofit instead of getting a real job. And now you're worried about getting credit for your donations. The unfairness stole my breath away. I had paid my own way through college using scholarships and loans. I'd never asked them for money as an adult. I had been donating to their church for 6 years, expecting nothing in return, except that the money go where I wanted it to go. I'm not asking for credit, I explained, my voice cracking. I'm asking you to stop taking credit for something you didn't do. And that's when she struck me. The slap came so fast that I didn't see it coming. I was standing by the kitchen counter trying to convey my viewpoint when suddenly my cheek burned and my head rang. The sound resonated around the kitchen, like a gunshot. Clara gave a gasp. The talk in the dining room came to a halt. I could hear chairs scrapping across the floor as people attempted to find out what had happened. I stood there, one hand raising involuntarily to touch my cheek, staring at my mother in utter shock. She hadn't touched me once in the previous 28 years. She was breathing quickly, her cheeks flushed with fury and possibly embarrassment. Don't you ever talk to me like that again, she demanded, her voice low and spiteful. Not in my house, not in front of my family, you ungrateful, selfish little girl. The words hung in the air between us, like poison. I could hear footsteps approaching from the dining room and voices inquiring if everything was all right. But all I could think of was the look in my mother's eyes. It wasn't all anger, it was colder, more calculated, as if she saw me as an impediment to be overcome rather than a daughter to be loved. I picked up my purse from the counter where I had left it earlier. My hands were remarkably steady, but I could feel a tremble beginning deep in my chest. I'm leaving, I explained quietly. Lena. Wait. Clara reached for my arm, but I drew back. I'm done. I proceeded through the dining room, where my entire extended family sat still in their chairs, forks halfway to their mouths, eyes wide with surprise and embarrassment. Uncle Henry attempted to stand, but I shook my head. Happy Easter, everyone, I remarked, my tone remarkably regular. Thank you for dinner. I let myself out of the front door and took careful steps to my car. I could hear voices behind me, yelling out my name, but I didn't turn around. I got into my Honda, started the motor, and drove away from Maple Street for what I thought would be the final time. It wasn't until I got 3 blocks away that I began crying. Not the dramatic wailing type of crying you see in movies, but the calm, constant tears that occur when you know something fundamental has changed in your life and there is no turning back. I drove to Layla's apartment complex and waited in the parking lot for 10 minutes, attempting to gather my thoughts enough to explain what had occurred. Layla Rodriguez had been my closest friend since college. She was the type of person who would drop everything to help you relocate or bring you soup when you were sick. She worked as a county social worker, so she recognized the value of family as well as the harm that families can cause. When she opened her door and saw my face, she asked no questions. She simply pulled me inside, prepared tea and waited for me to find the words. She hit me, I finally murmured, sitting on Layla's couch with a mug of chamomile to warm my hands. My mother actually slapped me because I questioned whether she was taking credit for my church donations. Layla's dark eyes burned with rage. She what? I recounted her the entire event, beginning with the unpleasant chat in the morning and ending with Mom's hand touching my cheek. Layla listened without interrupting, her expression darkening with every detail. Lena, that's not just about money or credit, that's about control. She's been using your generosity to boost her own status. And when you called her on it, she got violent. I keep thinking I must have said something wrong, or pushed too hard. No. Layla replied firmly. You asked reasonable questions about your own money. Her reaction tells you everything you need to know about her motives. That night, I stayed at Layla's, sleeping on her couch and attempting to figure out what had happened. My phone buzzed with texts from Clara, each of which said something like, Mom is really upset and you should apologize. Nothing from Mom herself. And nothing from Dad. Monday morning arrived dark and drizzling, which matched my attitude well. I went to work at the Riverside Family Services Center, and my position directing marketing for the homeless aid program felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done. I spent the day preparing grant proposals and updating the website, thankful for work that didn't require me to act like everything was all right. Pastor Reed called on Tuesday afternoon. I was going over spreadsheets for our upcoming fundraising drive when my desk phone called. The caller ID indicated Grace Community Church, and for a brief time, I pondered leaving the call on voicemail, but curiosity won out, and I answered on the 4th ring. Lena Mitchell speaking. Lena, This is Pastor William Reed from Grace Community. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. His speech had the practiced warmth that church leaders develop through years of pastoral care. But something below it caused me to sit up taller in my chair. Hello, Pastor Reed. What can I do for you? Well, I wanted to reach out personally about a rather delicate matter. It seems there may have been some confusion regarding your family's donation commitment for this year's building fund. I felt my stomach drop. After everything that had transpired on Easter, I didn't want to have this conversation with my family's pastor. What kind of confusion? Our records show that the Mitchell family pledged $25,000 for this year's building campaign, but we've only received $15,000 so far. I wanted to check if perhaps there was a delay with the remaining payment, or if there were any issues I should be aware of. The words struck me like freezing water. Pastor Reed, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I donated $15,000, which is my annual contribution. I've never pledged $25,000. There was a lengthy delay on the other end of the telephone. I see. Well, perhaps I should clarify. When your mother and I discussed the building fund back in January, she indicated that the Mitchell family would be increasing their total contribution this year. She mentioned that you had done very well financially and were eager to give more generously. My hand squeezed around the phone. My mother told you I wanted to give more money. She spoke very highly of your commitment to the church and your desire to follow in your parents' footsteps of generous giving. I believe her exact words were that you understood the importance of sacrificing for God's work. I closed my eyes and tried to digest what I was hearing. Not only had my mother taken credit for my donations, but she had also reportedly promised the church more money without consulting me. Pastor Reed, I need to be very clear about something. I give $15,000 to Grace Community every year, and that's my personal decision and my personal money. My parents contribute separately from their own funds. If my mother suggested that I would be giving more, she was mistaken. Another uneasy quiet. I appreciate your clarification, Lena. However, I do hope you'll understand that the church has made commitments based on the pledges we received. The construction company is depending on these funds, and we've already had to take out a loan to cover the shortfall. The guilt trip was so apparent it was almost offensive. I understand that funding is important, but I can only be responsible for what I actually pledged, which was $15,000. Of course. I wouldn't want to pressure you, but I do wonder if perhaps you might consider whether God is calling you to stretch your faith through increased giving. Your parents have always been such wonderful examples of sacrificial generosity. Again, my parents were held up as the benchmark, with the suggestion that I was falling short if I didn't meet their claimed degree of generosity. Except, I was beginning to suspect that their reputation for generosity was mostly due to my contributions. Pastor Reed, can I ask you something? When you think of the Mitchell family's total annual giving, what amount comes to mind? Well, I don't like to discuss specific numbers, but your family has consistently been among our most generous supporters. I believe the total has been around $25,000 to $30,000 annually. My parents gave $10,000. I gave $15,000. The math was straightforward, but Pastor Reed had been persuaded to assume it was all down to Mom and Dad's selfless gift, rather than understanding that more than half of it was my own contribution. I think there may have been some miscommunication about how our family's giving is structured, I added quietly. My donations are separate from my parents' donations. We're not giving as a single unit. I see. Pastor Reed seemed perplexed now. Your mother always presents the family contributions as a unified commitment. She's spoken so beautifully about how your father has worked hard to provide for the family, and how that enables everyone to give generously to God's work. The picture became clearer and more frustrating by the minute. Mom not only took credit for my money, but she also created a story in which Dad was the provider, allowing everyone else to be kind. Meanwhile, I was working full-time and donating from my own pay to a church where I was barely acknowledged as an individual. Pastor Reed, I need to clarify my position. Going forward, I'll be making my own donation decisions independently. If there were any commitments made on my behalf without my knowledge, I can't be held responsible for those. I understand your position, Lena, though I admit I'm somewhat surprised. Your mother spoke so passionately about the family's shared vision for supporting the church's growth. My mother doesn't speak for me when it comes to my financial decisions. The comments came out stronger than I had intended, and I could detect a shift in Pastor Reed's tone when he reacted. Of course not. I certainly didn't mean to overstep. However, I do hope you'll pray about whether you might find it in your heart to help us through this difficult situation. The building fund is so close to its goal, and every dollar makes a difference. I'll think about it, I responded, knowing full well what I was going to say. Thank you for calling, Pastor Reed. Thank you, Lena, and please give my regards to your parents. Your mother mentioned that Easter dinner was lovely. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen without seeing anything. Easter dinner was amazing. Right up until Mom struck me for questioning her sincerity regarding these donations. The fact that she had spoken to Pastor Reed about Easter as if it had been a joyful family gathering felt like an extra layer of dishonesty. I opened my laptop and accessed my online banking. There it was, my automated quarterly donation of $3,750 to Grace Community Church, made through the March Fund. I took a screenshot of the transaction and then navigated back through past months. Every payment is always on time and in the exact amount. Then I had another thought. I opened a new browser tab and browsed to the Grace Community website. Most churches list their big benefactors in yearly reports or newsletter acknowledgments. I found what I was looking for in the previous year's stewardship report, a list of families who had contributed more than $10,000, organized by giving level. The Mitchell family were in the $25,000 category, not Thomas or Janet Mitchell, not Thomas, Janet, or Lena Mitchell, it's just the Mitchell family, as if we were some type of financial entity where individual contributions were irrelevant. I felt nauseous. For 6 years, I had consistently given money to a religion that did not even recognize me as a person. Every dollar I provided was absorbed into my parents' reputation, allowing them to be hailed as great philanthropists while I went unnoticed. I contacted Layla during my lunch break because I needed to discuss what I had discovered with someone who could help me think straight. That's financial fraud, she replied right after I detailed the phone call. Maybe not legally, since you did authorize the donations, but ethically, it's completely wrong. What's really bothering me is that Pastor Reed seemed genuinely surprised to learn that I make my own giving decisions, like it had never occurred to him that I might be a separate person with my own relationship to the church. Because your mother has spent years presenting you as an extension of their family unit, rather than an adult with your own autonomy. It's a classic control tactic. I keep wondering if I should have seen this coming. There were signs like how Mom always wanted to know when I'd made my donations, or how she'd mentioned my generosity to other church members. Lena, you trusted your mother to be honest about something as basic as where your money was going. That's not naive, that's normal. The fact that she violated that trust says everything about her character and nothing about your judgment. That afternoon I wrote an email to Pastor Reed. I kept it simple and professional, noting that I would continue to donate $15,000 annually as agreed, but that any additional commitments made on my behalf were not permitted and would not be honored. I also requested that future messages regarding my donations be sent to me directly rather than through my parents. I did not submit it immediately. Instead, I saved it as a draft and chose to sleep on it. But that evening my phone started ringing. First, there was Clara. Lena, Mom is really upset. She says you were rude to Pastor Reed and made the family look bad. I was honest with Pastor Reed about my own donations. If that made anyone look bad, maybe they should examine why. Can't you just apologize for the sake of family harmony? Apologize for what? For not giving money I didn't promise to give? You know what I mean. Mom's been crying all day. The manipulation was so obvious it was almost comical. Mom beats me, lies about my donations, is caught in her lying, and I'm supposed to apologize to make her feel better? Clara, did you know that the church thinks Mom and Dad give $25,000 a year instead of 10? I don't really pay attention to those details. Well, you should. Because if they're taking credit for money they didn't give, that affects the whole family's reputation. Why does it matter who gets credit? We're all family. That word came up again. We're all family, as if being connected somehow eliminated the requirement for fundamental honesty and respect. It matters because it's lying, Clara. It matters because I work hard for my money, and I should get to decide how it's acknowledged when I give it away. You're being really selfish about this. I hung up. 20 minutes later, Dad called. His approach was different, more conciliatory, but still aimed at convincing me to back down. Lena, honey, I think there's been a big misunderstanding here. Your mother never meant to take credit for anything you've done. Dad, Pastor Reed told me that Mom promised I would increase my donation this year without asking me first. How is that not taking credit for my money? She was just trying to show the pastor that our family is committed to the church. Sometimes she gets a little enthusiastic about these things. A little enthusiastic? She let the church believe you two were giving $25,000 a year when you're actually giving $10. There was a prolonged pause. How did you know how much we give? The question took me off guard. I didn't until I started putting the pieces together. Pastor Reed said the Mitchell family gives $25,000 to $30,000 annually. I give $15,000, so I figured. You figured we only give $10,000? Dad's voice had become cooler. I didn't figure anything judgmental about it, Dad. $10,000 is generous, but it's not $25,000. And letting people think it is becomes a problem when they start expecting more. Your mother has devoted her life to that church, Lena. She volunteers for every committee, organizes half the social events, and brings meals to every family in crisis. If the pastor wants to recognize our family's overall contribution to the community, that includes more than just money. He was correct about Mom's voluntary activities, but that was not the issue. I'm not questioning Mom's service to the church. I'm questioning why my financial contributions are being absorbed into your reputation instead of being acknowledged as my own choice. Because you are our daughter, and we have trained you to be generous and faithful. Because when you give to the church, it reflects the values we instilled in you. But I am not a child anymore, Dad. I'm 28 years old, and I have my own work and relationship with my faith. When I want to offer money, that is my decision. And we're proud of that decision. We have never said differently. So why does Pastor Reed believe you are the one making sacrifices to enable everyone else's generosity? Another lapse in stillness. I think you're reading too much into casual conversation, Lena. Am I? Because Pastor Reed highlighted how hard you work to care for your family, which allows everyone to give freely. That is not a casual conversation, Dad. That's a specific narrative about who is accountable for the money. Look, your mother is upset and puzzled by all of this. She hit you and feels bad about it. Can't we simply put this behind us and go on as a family? There was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of what had happened on Easter, wrapped in a request to forget about it and pretend everything was well. Daddy, she didn't simply smack me. She accused me of being ungrateful and selfish for asking honest questions regarding my own money. And now she's claiming that I was rude to Pastor Reed when all I did was explain that she cannot make financial obligations on my behalf. She is your mother, Lena. She loves you. Love doesn't give someone the right to lie about my money or hit me when I object. You are not flawless, you know. Maybe you should approach these conversations with a bit more humility. I hung up on him too. By Thursday, the pressure campaign was in full swing. I received texts from 3 different aunts, all variations on the theme of family is more important than money and your mother is heartbroken. Uncle Henry called to say he didn't know all the details but hoped I would consider the bigger picture. And my cousin Nora weighed in with a carefully worded message about forgiveness and moving forward. The fact that I had been physically assaulted for inquiring about my own donations did not seem to register as relevant information. What struck me the most was that no one asked for my side of the story, as if they all assumed I had done something wrong and needed to apologize. Friday afternoon I emailed Pastor Reed. That evening my phone called again. This time, it was Mom. Lena Elizabeth Mitchell, I cannot believe you would embarrass this family the way you have. There was no hello, no apologies for assaulting me, no indication that we would need to talk about what had happened, only immediate attack mode. Hi Mom. Don't you say hi to me, Mom. Pastor Reed called me today, deeply concerned about your email. He claimed you were expecting special appreciation for your donations while refusing to honor the family's promises. That was not what I said at all. He claims you assured him you wouldn't be liable for any agreements made on your behalf. That's exactly what you said, because you promised him money without consulting me first. You told him I wanted to raise my donations, but I never said anything like that. Lena, I was attempting to aid the church. The building fund was running low, and I knew you cared about the community. Then you should have asked me instead of making promises with my money. It isn't simply your money. Everything you have is the result of your family's upbringing and the ideals we taught you. When you donate to the church, you represent all of us. I am expressing myself, Mom. I am an adult who makes my own decisions concerning my income. Your own income from a job working with homeless people instead of using the education we paid for to build a real career. There it was. The underlying reason of her rage wasn't church donations at all, but my failure to meet her expectations of what my life should be like. Mom, my job is real. It's a meaningful job that benefits others. It's a hobby job with no remuneration. If you'd married someone stable, like Clara did, or gone into business, as we suggested, you'd have the wherewithal to make a real impact instead of dabbling in charitable work. I am making a difference. And I have resources. I have enough money to donate $15,000 to your church each year, which appears to make me generous enough to improve your reputation, but not responsible enough to manage my own finances. How could you say we are using you for money? Everything we've done has been for your benefit. Are you claiming credit for my donations, including promising the church that I will give more without being asked? I have never taken credit for anything. I just informed Pastor Reed that the Mitchell family supported the church's mission. If you want to start keeping track of who gives what, You might think about how much your father and I have put into raising you. It's not about keeping score, Mom. This is about basic honesty. Honesty? Do you want to talk about honesty? How about being honest and honoring your parents rather than humiliating us in front of our pastor? I did not disgrace anyone. I clarified my own financial commitments. You made us look like liars. The revelation remained in the air between us. She'd basically admitted that they'd been misrepresenting their donating, but it was my fault for bringing it up. Mom, if clarifying the truth makes you look like liars, maybe the problem isn't what I said. Don't you dare lecture me about truth, you ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By making us appear horrible in church. I don't mean to make you appear awful. I'm attempting to ensure that my personal contributions are acknowledged. Honestly, your contributions wouldn't exist without everything we gave you. First, your education, your values, your opportunities. If you think you can just take credit for everything you've accomplished without acknowledging where it came from, you're more selfish than I thought. I've never denied that you raised me or that my values came from my upbringing. But giving money to charity is my choice, made with my income, from my bank account. That's not selfish, Mom. That's just factual. Facts. She spat the word as if it were profane. You want facts? Here's a fact. You're 28 years old, unmarried, working a job that barely pays your rent, and living alone in some apartment downtown like you're too good for family. You donate money to get attention and recognition because you don't have anything else in your life worth bragging about. The savagery stole my breath away. Not only the words, but their deliberate nature. She had recognized and weaponized every insecurity I'd ever confessed with her in a single paragraph. I donate money because I believe in the church's mission, not for attention. Then why do you care so much about getting credit? Why can't you just be happy that the money is helping people? Because when you take credit for my generosity, it becomes your generosity instead of mine. And when you promise additional money without asking me, you're spending my resources without my consent. Resources. She chuckled, but it wasn't funny. What resources? You make $35,000 a year working for a nonprofit. The only reason you can afford to give away $15,000 is because you don't have a family to support or a real life to maintain. My life is real, Mom. Is it? When's the last time you brought someone home for dinner? When's the last time you made any effort to find a husband or start a family? You give money to the church because it's easier than building actual relationships. I had to end this conversation before things got any worse. I'm not going to continue discussing my personal life or my donation decisions. I've been clear with Pastor Reed about my position, and that's final. Your position, like you're some kind of business executive instead of our daughter, who's forgotten where she came from. I haven't forgotten anything, Mom. I just refuse to be treated like a child when it comes to my own money. Then stop acting like a child. Stop being so selfish and stubborn. Apologize to Pastor Reed. Commit to the building fund contribution you should have made in the first place. And remember that family loyalty means something. And if I don't? The silence was lengthy enough that I assumed she had hung up. Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices. The warning was vague but obvious. I was given an ultimatum. Comply with their requests or risk punishment. I can live with the consequences of being honest about my own donations, Mom. We'll see about that. She hung up. I sat on my couch, staring at the phone in my fingers, trying to figure out what had just happened. In 1 week, I went from being a devoted daughter who willingly donated to her family's church, to an ungrateful, selfish and difficult child who deserved to be punished for expressing fundamental financial autonomy. But something changed in me during that talk. Mom's brutal precision in her personal attacks indicated something significant. This was not truly about church donations at all. This was about maintaining control by putting me in a dependent, childish role in which my decisions and achievements could be incorporated into the family narrative without regard for my unique identity. I opened my laptop and started writing an email to Grace Community Church's administrative office. If they wished to regard the Mitchell family as a single financial unit, they were about to find out what happened when a member of that unit decided to resign from participation. The next morning, I would contact the church's finance secretary and ask that my name be removed from any family-based contributor recognition. My future donations, if any, will be made independently and acknowledged individually, or not at all. But first, I needed to figure out how much effect my money had on my parents at Grace Community Church. I spent Saturday morning at the Riverside Public Library, using their computers to look into Grace Community Church's financial records and public filings. What I discovered made my stomach turn unexpectedly. The prior year's annual report from the church included more than just a list of donations. It included thorough breakdowns of committee leadership, volunteer appreciation, and special awards for noteworthy efforts. The Mitchell family received recognition for more than simply their $25,000 contribution. Mom was named chair of the Ladies' Auxiliary, co-chair of the annual charity auction, and received the Faithful Servant Award for outstanding community service. Dad's name appeared on the Finance Committee and the Building Fund Oversight Board, both of which had a substantial impact on how the church's money was spent and which projects received priority funding. I compared their volunteer involvement to the timing of my donations. Mom had been elected chair of the Ladies' Auxiliary exactly 6 months after I made my first substantial contribution to the church. Dad joined the Finance Committee the next year. Every elevation in their church leadership appeared to coincide with my continuous giving pattern. The most damaging evidence, however, came from the Building Fund Committee's meeting minutes, which were public record, because the church was pursuing city construction licenses. The December meeting notes included a direct quotation from Dad. The Mitchell family stands ready to lead by example in this campaign. We believe in putting our money where our faith is. Our money, we have faith. He was practically speaking for me in formal church business, pledging resources that I had never consented to provide. I printed everything out and drove to Layla's flat. When I arrived, she was still in her jammies and appeared much more calm than I was. "You look like you haven't slept," she added, pouring coffee for me without asking. "I've been doing research." I put the printouts across the kitchen table. "Look at this." Layla reviewed the documents while I recounted what I had discovered. Her expression darkened as she read the meeting minutes and donor acknowledgments. "Lena, this is worse than I thought. They're not just taking credit for your money, they're using your donations to buy influence, and then wielding that influence to make commitments on your behalf." That's what I was thinking. Dad's on the committee that approved the building fund budget, which means he had input into how much money they plan to raise. And then he stood up in meetings promising that our family would contribute more. It's a conflict of interest at minimum. He's using inside information about church finances to make promises with money that isn't his, and he's doing it from a position of authority that he obtained partly through your donations. I slumped onto Layla's kitchen chair, overwhelmed by what I had discovered. I thought this was just about them taking credit for my generosity, but they've been using my money to build a power base at church. And now that you're pushing back, they're afraid of losing that power. That's why your mom is so angry. It's not really about the church or your faith, it's about their status in the community. Layla poured my coffee and sat across from me. "What do you want to do about this?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to expose everything, show the church exactly how the Mitchell family's generous reputation was built. But part of me just wants to walk away and never think about any of these people again. Those aren't mutually exclusive options. You can expose the truth and then walk away. But if I do that, I'm not just hurting my parents. There are other people at church who genuinely care about the community and the building project. If my revelations cause a scandal, it could hurt programs that actually help people. Lena, you're not responsible for cleaning up other people's messes. Your parents created this situation by lying and manipulating. If there are consequences for the church, that's on them, not you." She was correct, but it still seemed overwhelming. I never wanted to be the one who pulled down institutions or caused community strife. I only wanted my contributions to be appreciated, honestly. Clara texted me. "Mom wants to know if you're planning to come to church tomorrow. People are asking questions." I showed Layla the message, and she rolled her eyes. "People are asking questions because your mother probably told them some version of events that makes you look like the problem." I can't face going to church right now. The thought of sitting there while Pastor Reed gives a sermon about forgiveness and family values, knowing what I know about how the finances really work, it makes me sick. Then don't go. You don't owe anyone your presence at church, especially not when they're treating you this badly. I spent the rest of the weekend at Layla's house, helping her arrange her wardrobe and trying not to worry about what was going on at Grace Community Church that Sunday morning. But Monday brought a new level of strain that I was unprepared for. Carol Jensen, the church secretary, phoned me at work. Her tone was carefully neutral, as is customary for church workers when giving uncomfortable leadership messages. "Lena, Pastor Reed asked me to reach out about your donation status for this quarter. Our records show some confusion about whether you'll be fulfilling the commitment that was made on behalf of your family." "Carol, I sent Pastor Reed an email explaining that I didn't make any additional commitments beyond my regular annual donation." "Yes, he mentioned that, but he's concerned about the discrepancy between what was pledged and what we've received. The building fund is depending on those commitments. I understand that funding is important, but I can only be responsible for commitments I actually made." "Of course. But Lena, I hope you'll consider that your family has always been such strong supporters of the church. Your parents' leadership has been invaluable to our community." There it was again, Mild pressure veiled in recognition of my parents' donations, as if their volunteer work required me to provide money I hadn't pledged to give. I appreciate everything my parents do for the church, Carol, but my financial decisions are separate from theirs. I understand. Pastor Reed just asked me to make sure you knew how much the church values the Mitchell family's partnership. He's hoping we can find a way to work through this misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding on my end. I've been very clear about my donation intentions. Of course. Well, if you change your mind or want to discuss options for supporting the building fund, please let me know. After I hung up, I knew the church's pressure campaign had only just begun. They were not going to take my situation gently. They planned to keep pushing, using my parents' reputation and their own authority to attempt to wear me down. That afternoon I called Nathan Cole, a lawyer Layla had recommended who specializes in nonprofit and family law. His office was downtown, in one of those renovated historic buildings that attempted to strike a compromise between professional legitimacy and approachable appeal. Nathan was probably in his early 40s, with graying hair and a placid manner that suggested he'd witnessed every conceivable type of family financial stress. I described the incident as he took notes on a legal pad. So your parents have been misrepresenting your donations as part of their own giving. They used that false reputation to gain leadership positions at the church, and now they're using those positions to make financial commitments on your behalf. He summarized. That's the core of it, yes. And when you attempted to clarify the situation, your mother physically assaulted you. Hearing it so clearly made it sound even worse than it felt at the time. She slapped me. Yes. Lena, what you're describing could potentially be fraud depending on how the church's donation records are maintained and whether your parents received any direct benefits from their false reputation. What kind of benefits? Leadership positions that come with decision-making authority, social status that could benefit them professionally or personally, access to church resources or facilities. If they gained tangible advantages by lying about their giving levels, that could cross legal lines. I had not considered the professional viewpoint. Dad's hardware store conducted a lot of business with church members, and Mom's volunteer leadership most likely created doors in the community that helped them financially. What would you recommend? First, document everything, every conversation, every email, every piece of evidence about how your donations were misrepresented. Second, formally withdraw any authorization for your parents to speak on your behalf regarding financial matters. Third, consider whether you want to notify the church leadership about the misrepresentation. Would that create legal problems for my parents? Possibly. If the church has been making financial decisions based on false information, they could have grounds for action against whoever provided that false information. But Lena, that's not your responsibility to prevent. Your parents created this situation. Nathan led me through the process of documenting financial abuse, which is apparently more widespread in familial situations than I had previously understood. He provided me with paperwork for tracking communications, and a template for formally notifying institutions that my parents were not permitted to make commitments on my behalf. One more thing, he added as I prepared to depart. If this escalates, if they start threatening your employment, or trying to damage your reputation in the community, document that too. Retaliation often reveals the true motives behind the original deception. I drove home feeling better prepared to face the problem, but also more aware of how serious it had gotten. This was no longer just a financial disagreement among family members. It was possibly a legal issue with serious ramifications for everyone concerned. That evening, I sent formal letters to Grace Community Church and my parents. The letter to the church requested that my gift records be kept separate from any family accounts, and that I be informed directly regarding all aspects of my donations. The letter to my parents stated that they were no longer authorized to make financial commitments on my behalf, and that I would hold them accountable for any debts imposed in my name. I did not send either letter promptly. Instead, I addressed my Uncle Henry, my father's brother, who had always appeared to be the most rational member of the extended family. Lena, I'm glad you called. I've been worried about you since Easter. Uncle Henry, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course. How much do you think Mom and Dad give to Grace Community Church every year? There was a pause. I don't really know the specifics, honey. Why? Because I've been giving $15,000 annually, and I just found out that the church thinks it's all coming from Mom and Dad. They've been taking credit for my donations and using that false reputation to gain leadership positions. Are you sure about that? Your parents have always been generous people. I'm sure about my own donations, Uncle Henry. I have bank records, and I'm sure about what Pastor Reed told me regarding the family's total giving. Another pause. That does sound problematic if they've been misrepresenting things. It gets worse. Mom promised the church I would increase my donation this year without asking me. When I questioned her about it, she slapped me. She what? She hit me, Uncle Henry, in front of the whole family. Jesus, Lena. I didn't know it had gotten physical. So everyone knows there was some kind of conflict, but nobody knows the details. Your mother told us there had been a misunderstanding about church donations, and that you'd gotten upset and left. She made it sound like you'd overreacted to something minor. She's been spinning the story to make me look like the problem. It sounds like there's a lot more going on than I understood. Lena, what do you need from me? The question took me off guard. After a week of family members urging me to apologize and give in, having someone ask what I needed seemed revolutionary. I need people to know the truth. I need them to understand that I didn't overreact or create drama over nothing. I was defending myself against lies and manipulation. I believe you, and I'll make sure other people know there's more to the story than what your mother has been saying. Thank you. That means more than you know. Lena, can I ask you something? What do you want to happen now? Do you want to repair things with your parents, or are you done with them? I had been avoiding the question, but Uncle Henry's forthright approach compelled me to face it. I don't know if repair is possible, Uncle Henry. This isn't just about money or church donations, it's about them treating me like a child whose decisions don't matter, taking credit for my choices and then getting violent when I object. I can't pretend that's okay. I understand. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling this with more grace than I would under the circumstances. After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. Having one family member admit that my stance was logical helped me feel less solitary and weird, but my relief was fleeting. The next morning I received a call that altered everything. Lena, this is Dr. Patricia Kaplan from Riverside Family Services. I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your employment here. My blood ran cold. Dr. Kaplan was the executive director of the organization where I worked, a lady I admired greatly and whose opinion was important to my career. What kind of concerning information? I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be a board member at Grace Community Church. They expressed concerns about your professionalism and suggested that you might not be a good fit for an organization that works closely with faith-based community partners. The room began spinning. Dr. Kaplan, I think there may be some misunderstanding. I've been having a personal dispute with my family about church donations, but it has nothing to do with my work performance. That's what I suspected. The caller couldn't provide specific examples of unprofessional behavior, and your work here has been exemplary. But Lena, I need you to know that someone is actively trying to damage your professional reputation. Did they give a name? They said they were calling on behalf of the church leadership, but they wouldn't identify themselves specifically. However, they seem to have detailed knowledge of your family situation. My parents had upped their attacks on my career. They were so desperate to get me back in compliance that they were willing to destroy my livelihood. Dr. Kaplan, I want to be completely transparent with you about what's been happening. I told her the entire tale, beginning with the Easter dinner confrontation and ending with my discovery of the financial fraud and the church pressure campaign. She listened without interrupting and occasionally asked clarifying questions. Lena, I appreciate your honesty. Based on what you've told me, it sounds like you're being subjected to financial abuse and retaliation for standing up for yourself. That's completely unacceptable. I'm so sorry this has spilled over into my work life. I never wanted my personal problems to affect the organization. You're not the one who made it affect your work. Someone else chose to attack your professional reputation as a way of pressuring you personally. That tells me everything I need to know about their motives and character. What should I do? First, document this call and any other attempts to interfere with your employment. Second, consider whether you want to pursue legal action against whoever made that call. False statements intended to damage someone's professional reputation can constitute defamation. And my job? Your job is secure, Lena. Your work speaks for itself, and I'm not going to let someone's personal vendetta affect our staffing decisions. But I do want you to let me know immediately if you receive any more calls or contacts related to this situation. After hanging up, I sat at my computer, attempting to figure out what had just transpired. My parents did not just lie about my donations or slap me when I disagreed. They also attempted to harm my job because I refused to comply with their demands. The treachery was so complete and deliberate that it finally clarified something I'd been confused about all week. This was not a family dispute that could be settled by communication or compromise. This was war, and my parents had made it clear the moment they chose to attack my livelihood. I opened my laptop and emailed both letters I'd written the night before to Grace Community Church, officially removing my donations from my parents' accounts. The one to my parents, alerting them that they no longer had permission to speak on my behalf in any way. Then I contacted Nathan Cole to schedule an emergency appointment. If my parents wanted to escalate this argument to the point of destroying my career, they were about to discover that I too could escalate. But first, I had another call to make. Layla responded on the first ring. They tried to get me fired, I stated without hesitation. What? Someone from Grace Community Church called my boss and tried to convince her I was unprofessional and shouldn't work for an organization that partners with faith-based groups. Lena, that's illegal. That's defamation and interference with employment. I know. I'm meeting with the lawyer this afternoon. Good. Are you okay? Actually, I think I am. For the first time since this whole thing started, I'm not confused about what I should do. They just made it very clear that they see me as an enemy to be destroyed, rather than a daughter to be loved. What does that mean for you? It means I'm done trying to preserve relationships with people who are willing to attack my career to get their way. It means I'm going to fight back with everything I have. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet. Wait until you see what I do next. Nathan Cole relaxed back in his leather chair as I completed outlining the attempt to undermine my employment. His attitude had changed from professional concern to something resembling fury. Lena, what you're describing crosses several legal lines: defamation, intentional interference with employment, possibly conspiracy if multiple people were involved in coordinating these attacks. He took out a fresh legal paper and started writing. We need to move quickly to protect you and document everything. What kind of protection? First, we're going to send cease and desist letters to your parents and to Grace Community Church, demanding that they stop making any statements about you to third parties. Second, we're going to formally request that the church provide records of who authorized that call to your employer. Can they refuse? They can try, but if we have to file suit to get the information, a judge will order them to produce it. Churches aren't exempt from accountability when they engage in defamatory conduct. Nathan led me through the steps of preparing a legal case. It would necessitate meticulous documentation of every conversation, financial record, and occasion in which my parents or the church falsified information about me. The idea of turning my family turmoil into a legal concern seemed absurd, but the alternative was to let them continue to damage my reputation and livelihood. There's something else we should think about, Nathan added. If your parents have been using your donation history to gain influence at the church, and if they've been making financial commitments based on that false influence, the church itself might have claims against them. What do you mean? Think about it. If the church budgeted for a $25,000 donation from your family based on your parents' representations, and they can only actually collect $15,000, the church has been financially harmed by your parents' deception. I hadn't considered the possibility that my parents may face sanctions from the church itself. Grace Community Church was a major institution in Riverside, with wealthy members and considerable political clout. If they learned they had been duped, they would have resources to seek accountability that I could never equal as an individual. Would that help my case? It could. If the church pursues action against your parents for misrepresentation, it corroborates your claims about their deceptive behavior. Plus, it shifts some of the pressure off you. Instead of being the daughter who's causing problems for the family, you become the whistleblower who exposed fraud that harmed the church. I left Nathan's office with a large packet of documents to fill out, and a time frame for legal action that felt both terrifying and inspiring. For the first time since Easter Sunday, I felt in control of the situation. However, that evening came an unexpected event. Clara called when I was reheating leftover Chinese cuisine, her voice filled with barely controlled worry. Lena, we need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere tonight? What's wrong? I can't discuss it over the phone. Can you come to Corner Cafe on 5th Street? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Her voice was urgent, unlike anything I'd heard from my generally composed older sister. Despite my better judgment, I consented to meet her. Corner Cafe was practically deserted at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Only a few college students with laptops and an older couple eating dessert. Clara was already present when I arrived, seated in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee going cold in front of her. She appeared weary, with her typically flawless makeup somewhat smudged and her hair pulled back in an untidy ponytail. Thank you for coming, she murmured as I sat in the booth across from her. You sounded upset on the phone. What's going on? Clara looked around the cafe, as if to ensure no one was listening, before leaning forward and lowering her voice. Eric and I had a long conversation with Mom and Dad tonight about everything that's been happening with you and the church. Okay. Lena, there are things you don't know, things that make this situation much worse than you realize. My stomach constricted. What things? Dad's been having financial problems with the hardware store for almost 2 years. The big box stores are killing his business, and he took out a loan against the store to keep it operating. I didn't know that. Nobody was supposed to know. But the loan payment is $1,500 a month and some months he can barely make it. I waited for her to continue, sensing that there was more. The reason Mom has been so involved with church leadership is because Dad was hoping to get some of the church's business. They need suppliers for the building project, and if Dad could land that contract, it would save the store. The pieces were fitting together in such a way that I felt nauseous. So when Mom told the church that our family was giving $25,000 instead of $15,000, she was trying to boost Dad's chances of getting the supply contract. It's worse than that, Lena. Dad already got the contract 3 months ago. It's worth $80,000 over the next year. I stared at her. He got a business contract based on a lie about our family's donations. The contract was awarded after a committee vote. Dad was on the committee that approved the building budget, and Mom was chair of the fundraising subcommittee. They used the influence they gained from your donations to position themselves for the business opportunity. That's fraud, Clara. That's actual criminal fraud. I know. Her voice was hardly audible. And there's more. Clara persisted despite my reservations. The $15,000 difference between what the church expected from our family and what they actually received, Dad covered it. What do you mean he covered it? He wrote a personal check for $10,000 to make up the shortfall so the church wouldn't know that Mom had been lying about the family's giving level. My mind was reeling. So Dad paid $10,000 to cover up Mom's lie about my donations because they needed to maintain their false reputation to keep the business contract they obtained fraudulently? Yes. And the $10,000 came from... where? The failing hardware store. Clara's face wrinkled. He borrowed it from Eric and me. He told us it was for store inventory. But after tonight's conversation, we realized what it was really for. I felt like I was slipping down a rabbit hole of deception that was just getting deeper with each discovery. My parents had not only claimed credit for my gifts, they had also used that false credit to acquire a company contract, then borrowed money from Clara to cover up their lies when I refused to donate any more. Clara, why are you telling me this? Because Eric and I are financially tied to this now. If Dad's fraud gets exposed, if he loses the church contract, he can't pay us back. And if the store fails, we're out $15,000 that we were planning to use for a house down payment. So you want me to stay quiet to protect your investment? No. She shook her head firmly. That's what I thought I wanted when Eric and I drove over there tonight. But after seeing how Mom and Dad talked about you, after hearing what they've been saying to other family members, I realized I can't be part of this anymore. What have they been saying? Clara took out her phone and read through text messages. Mom has been telling everyone that you're having some kind of mental health crisis, that you've become paranoid and delusional about money, and that the family needs to present a united front to help you through your breakdown. She showed me screenshots of group text chats between various relatives. The narrative was continuous and terrible. According to Mom, I had become obsessed with receiving credit for my charity donations. I was making baseless charges against the family and was in serious need of professional assistance and family support. She's been positioning herself as the concerned mother trying to help her troubled daughter while simultaneously undermining everything you've said about the donation situation. And people believe her? Some do. Others are asking questions. But Lena, she's been very strategic about this. She's not denying that there was confusion about donations, she's framing it as evidence of your mental instability. The level of skill in the manipulation was amazing. Mom had discovered a method to acknowledge the facts while entirely altering their interpretation. Yes, there was some uncertainty about donations, but only because I was experiencing psychological issues that made me worried about family finances. What about the call to my boss? That was Pastor Reed, but Mom encouraged him to do it. She told him that you were showing signs of instability and that your employer should be aware that you might not be reliable. And you believe this? You thought I was having a breakdown? Clara appeared ashamed. For a while, yes. The way Mom presented it, it seemed like you were overreacting to normal family dynamics. But tonight, when I pressed them for specifics about your supposed mental health issues, everything fell apart. What do you mean? I asked Mom to explain exactly what you had said or done that indicated psychological problems. All she could point to was your insistence on getting credit for your donations and your refusal to give more money to the church. And that convinced you? That plus some things Eric noticed. He pointed out that your behavior had been completely normal at Easter dinner, until the moment Mom put you on the spot about the condo donation. He said you handled that situation with more composure than most people would have managed. I felt a wave of thankfulness for my brother-in-law, whom I'd never been especially close to but who appeared to be paying attention when it mattered. So what do you want from me now, Clara? I want to help you expose the truth. Eric and I have decided that we'd rather lose our money than be part of covering up fraud. Even if it means Dad loses the church contract, and the hardware store fails? Even then. Because if we help cover this up now, where does it end? What happens the next time Mom and Dad need money or influence? Do they use our reputations the way they used yours? Clara had reached the same conclusion I had been debating all week. It wasn't simply about money or church contributions. It was about a pattern of manipulation and control that would only worsen until stopped. What kind of help are you offering? I have records. Dad asked me to help him with some paperwork related to the church contract, so I have copies of the bid documents and the committee meeting minutes. I also have bank records showing when he borrowed money from us and when he made the donation to cover the shortfall. You'd be willing to provide those to my lawyer? Yes. And I'd be willing to testify about what Mom and Dad told us regarding their strategy for getting the contract. Clara, if this goes to court, it could destroy them. Dad could face criminal charges for fraud. And they could lose everything. I know. But Lena, they tried to destroy your career to cover up their lies. They've been systematically undermining your reputation with the entire extended family. At what point do we stop enabling their behavior? She was correct. But the thought of potentially wrecking my parents' lives felt overwhelming. Even after everything they'd done, the prospect of being accountable for their financial ruin made me sick. I need to think about this. I understand. But Lena, there's something else you should know. Mom and Dad are planning to escalate their campaign against you. What do you mean? They're going to file a police report claiming that you've been harassing them and making threats. They want to get a restraining order that would prevent you from contacting them or coming to family events. On what grounds? I haven't harassed or threatened anyone. They're going to claim that your emails to the church and your demands about donation records constitute harassment. And they're going to say that your refusal to respect their authority as parents creates a threatening environment. That's ridiculous. No court would issue a restraining order based on emails about donation records. Maybe not. But they can make you spend time and money fighting it. And in the meantime, they get to tell everyone that their daughter has become so unstable that they needed legal protection from her. The strategic reasoning that drove their approach was terrifying. They were willing to use the judicial system to manipulate the story and drive me into a defensive position. When are they planning to file this report? Tomorrow morning. I had fewer than 12 hours to decide whether I should fight back with everything I had or try to de-escalate a situation that had already gotten out of control. Clara, if I go forward with legal action against them and if you provide evidence, what happens to your relationship with Mom and Dad? It's probably over. They'll never forgive me for taking your side, especially if my testimony helps expose their fraud. And you're okay with that? She remained quiet for a long time, staring down at her coffee cup. I love Mom and Dad, Lena. But I can't love them more than I love the truth. And I can't build my future on money that was obtained through fraud and covered up through lies. What does Eric think about all this? Eric thinks our parents raised us to have integrity. And that integrity means standing up for what's right, even when it's painful. He says, if we help cover up fraud now, we become accomplices to it. I stretched across the table to squeeze Clara's hand. For the first time since Easter, I felt like I had an ally in my family who recognized the true nature of the battle. Okay, I'll call my lawyer tonight and tell him to expect new evidence. And Clara, thank you for choosing to tell me the truth. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us contemplating the gravity of our recent decision. Clara then took out a manila envelope from her purse. These are copies of everything I have: bank records, contract documents, meeting minutes, text message screenshots. I made them before I called you tonight, in case I lost my nerve about helping you. I took the envelope and felt its weight, both physically and metaphorically. There's one more thing, Clara explained. Uncle Henry called me before I came here. He said he's been asking questions around the extended family, and he's discovered that several people are uncomfortable with Mom's version of events. What kind of questions? He's been asking people to think about whether your behavior at Easter really seemed like that of someone having a mental breakdown, or whether it seemed like someone standing up for themselves. And he's been pointing out that none of Mom's explanations account for why she hit you. And what are people saying? Cousin Nora said she always thought there was something off about Mom's story. Aunt Diana said she was surprised by how calmly you handled the situation at Easter, given that you'd supposedly been acting irrationally. Uncle Frank said he'd never seen you be anything other than reasonable and mature. So Mom's claims about instability didn't ring true. So the narrative is starting to crack. It's starting to crack. But Lena, that's also why Mom and Dad are escalating to legal threats. They know their story isn't holding up under scrutiny, so they're trying to shut down the conversation entirely. I left Corner Cafe with Clara's evidence and a clear idea of what I needed to accomplish. My parents had made their decision to assault my career and reputation. Now they intended to utilize the judicial system to completely silence me, but they had overlooked two critical aspects. First, I had allies they were unaware of. Second, they had committed actual crimes that could be proved by paperwork. I contacted Nathan Cole from my car and left a voicemail informing him that I had new evidence and wanted an emergency meeting first thing in the morning. Then I called Layla and begged to spend the night at her apartment. Of course. Are you okay? I'm about to destroy my parents' lives, Layla. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I'm completely certain it's the right thing to do. What changed? I found out they've been committing fraud. They tried to frame me as mentally unstable. And they're planning to file false police reports to get a restraining order against me. Jesus, Lena, how did this escalate so quickly? It didn't escalate quickly. It was always this bad. I just didn't understand the full scope of what they were doing. What happens now? Now I fight back with everything I've got. And I stopped caring about protecting people who never cared about protecting me. That night, laying on Layla's couch and staring at the ceiling, I remembered the person I'd been 2 weeks before. Someone who generously donated to her family's church, attended holiday dinners, and attempted to maintain peace despite feeling unappreciated and disregarded. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who recognized that sometimes the folks who raised you to be good are the ones who seek to exploit that kindness. Someone who understood that sometimes protecting yourself means demolishing the illusions that others rely on. Tomorrow I would give Nathan Cole enough evidence to file criminal charges against my parents. I would offer documentation that could lose Dad his business and land both of them in jail. And for the first time since Easter Sunday, I could sleep soundly knowing I was finally fighting for myself with the same zeal they were battling against me. Nathan Cole came at his office at 7 a.m., an hour ahead of his usual schedule, after getting my voicemail. I was waiting in the parking lot, clutching Clara's envelope and a thermos of coffee that I'd hardly tasted. Lena, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't. But I have everything we need to stop this before it gets worse. In his office, I spread Clara's paperwork across his conference table and explained what my sister had revealed regarding the business contract, the borrowed money, and my parents' plan to file fraudulent police reports. Nathan carefully read each paper, occasionally asking clarifying questions and taking notes. When I was done telling everything, he sat back in his chair and whistled quietly. This is significantly more serious than I initially understood. What you're describing isn't just family dysfunction or even simple fraud. This is organized conspiracy involving multiple parties and institutions. What does that mean legally? It means your parents could face federal charges, not just state-level fraud prosecution, conspiracy to defraud a religious institution, obtaining money under false pretenses. And if we can prove the call to your employer was coordinated, potentially RICO charges. The acronym sounded sinister. RICO? Racketeering laws. They apply when multiple people work together to commit crimes through an ongoing enterprise. If your parents coordinated with church officials to misrepresent donations, obtain contracts, and then retaliate against you for exposing them, that could qualify. I looked at the documents sprawled across the table. In less than 2 weeks, my family's Easter meal disagreement had escalated into probable federal criminal charges. Nathan, I need to understand something. If we pursue this fully, what happens to them? Best case scenario for your parents: they lose the church contract, face civil lawsuits for financial damages, and deal with professional reputation destruction. Worst case: prison time, asset forfeiture, and permanent criminal records. And the church? Grace Community Church will likely face its own investigation. If they awarded contracts based on false information, if they participated in retaliating against you professionally, they could lose their tax-exempt status and face civil liability. The extent of the potential repercussions was startling. I had began this effort to gain honest recognition for my donations. Now I was sitting on evidence that might devastate many institutions and land people in prison. There's something else we need to address right away, Nathan added. You mentioned they're planning to file false police reports this morning. According to Clara, yes. We need to get ahead of that. I'm going to call the Riverside Police Department and request a meeting with a detective. We'll present our evidence first, establish that your parents have motive to file false reports, and protect you from their preemptive strike. Nathan made the call while I sat, trying to process how fast everything was happening. Within an hour, we were seated across from Detective Maria Ramirez in an interview room at the police station, going over the entire timeline from Easter supper to the present. Detective Ramirez was a lady in her 40s with a calm, professional manner that suggested she'd witnessed every type of family financial wrongdoing. She made copious notes and posed probing questions regarding specific dates, amounts, and communications. Miss Mitchell, do you have any evidence that your parents explicitly intended to defraud the church when they began misrepresenting your donations? I took out my phone and showed her the text message screenshots Clara had provided. In a 6-month-old discussion between my parents, Dad wrote, "The church contract decision is next week. Make sure they know how much the Mitchell family contributes." Her answer was, "I'll talk to Pastor Reed about our family's commitment to the building fund. Between Lena's money and our reputation, we should have no problem." Detective Ramirez examined the messages. This suggests premeditation. They knew they were using your donations to enhance their reputation for business purposes. "There's more," Nathan said, giving him printouts of the committee meeting minutes where Dad promised additional family donations. After evaluating everything, Detective Ramirez looked up with an expression that I couldn't read. "Miss Mitchell, I need to tell you that about an hour ago, your parents did file a report claiming you've been harassing them with demands for money and making threats about exposing private family business." My stomach sank. "Are you going to arrest me?" "Number, based on what you've shown me here, the report appears to be an attempt to discredit you before you could present evidence of their crimes. That's called anticipatory retaliation, and it actually strengthens your case." "What happens now?" "Now we open a formal investigation into fraud, conspiracy, and filing false police reports. I'll need to interview your sister, examine the church's financial records, and speak with anyone who can corroborate your account of events." Nathan and I left the police station with the weird sensation of handing over control of my family's fate to the authorities. There was no turning back now. That afternoon, when Detective Ramirez began her investigation, I received an unexpected call. "Lena, this is Pastor William Reed. I think we need to talk." "Pastor Reed, my lawyer has advised me not to discuss the situation directly with anyone from the church. I understand your position. But there are developments you should be aware of. Can you meet with me and our board president this evening? I promise this isn't an ambush or an attempt to pressure you." Something about his tone indicated real concern rather than manipulation. Against Nathan's advice, I agreed to meet at Keys Church at 6 p.m., with the understanding that I would leave immediately if the talk turned heated. Grace Community Church appeared less imposing in the early evening light, more like the community institution it was intended to be rather than the power center it had become under my parents' control. Pastor Reed was waiting in his office with Margaret Dawson, the board president, and a retired bank executive whom I had met at numerous church occasions over the years. Both appeared uneasy, as if they had been having painful chats. "Lena, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." I remained standing. "Pastor Reed, I want to be clear that I'm here to listen, not to negotiate about donations or family reconciliation." "I understand, Lena. This afternoon we received a visit from a police detective asking questions about your family's donation history and your father's contract with the church." "Okay." Margaret Dawson spoke up. "We've spent the last several hours reviewing financial records, committee meeting minutes, and correspondence related to your family's involvement with the church." And Pastor Reed appeared to be in genuine pain. "We've discovered significant discrepancies between what we believed about your family's giving and what the records actually show." "What kind of discrepancies?" "For the past 3 years we've been operating under the understanding that your parents were contributing approximately $20,000 annually with additional family contributions bringing the total to $25,000, or $30,000, but the actual records show your parents have given exactly $10,000 each year. Your contributions have been $15,000 annually. We somehow lost track of the fact that you were making separate donations." Margaret Dawson took out a folder. "More concerning is what we've discovered about the contract award process. Your father was involved in budget discussions where he had access to information about expected donation levels, and he used that information to make promises about family giving." "Are you saying he had inside information when he bid for the supply contract?" "We're saying there was a clear conflict of interest that wasn't properly disclosed. Committee members aren't supposed to bid for contracts related to projects they help oversee." Pastor Reed leaned forwards. "Lena, we owe you an enormous apology. We allowed your individual contributions to be absorbed into your family's reputation, and we failed to recognize the ethical problems with your father's dual role as committee member and contractor." "What does that mean practically?" Margaret Dawson replied. "It means we're canceling your father's contract and launching a full review of our governance policies. It also means we're implementing new procedures to ensure individual donors are acknowledged separately from family accounts." "And the building fund shortfall that I was supposed to cover?" "There is no shortfall," Pastor Reed stated. We've discovered that your father made a $10,000 donation in March specifically to cover the gap between what we expected from your family and what we actually received. When we account for that correctly, the building fund is exactly where it should be." I felt both vindicated and saddened. The church was finally accepting the truth, but only after a police inquiry. "Pastor Reed, there's something I need you to understand. The call you made to my employer wasn't just inappropriate, it was defamatory and potentially criminal." He grimaced. "I realize that now. Your mother convinced me that you were struggling with personal issues that might affect your professional judgment. I see now that she was manipulating me to pressure you into compliance. What are you going to do about that?" "I've already called Dr. Kaplan at Riverside Family Services to apologize and clarify that the church has no concerns about your professional capabilities. I've also submitted a formal statement to the police explaining my role in that incident." Margaret Dawson added, "The board is also prepared to provide a written statement supporting your professional reputation, should you need it for any future employment situations." I appreciated their efforts to make amends, but the harm to my relationship with the church seemed irreversible. "I think I'll be finding a new place to worship." "I understand," Pastor Reed replied calmly. "But Lena, I hope you'll consider that Grace Community Church made mistakes in governance and oversight, not in fundamental values. We want to do better, and we've learned important lessons from this situation. The lessons you've learned came at the cost of my family relationships and my sense of safety in this community. I'm glad you're implementing better policies, but I can't pretend this didn't happen." "Of course. But please know that you'll always be welcome here if you choose to return." I left the church feeling emotionally exhausted, but legally vindicated. Pastor Reed's admissions would bolster the case against my parents and show that even the church acknowledged they had been duped. The next morning, news arrived that changed everything again. Detective Ramirez called to tell me my parents had been arrested. Both Thomas and Janet Mitchell were taken into custody this morning on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and interference with employment. Your father faces additional charges related to the conflict of interest in the contract process. What happens now? They'll be arraigned later today. Based on the evidence, I expect significant bail amounts and conditions that prevent them from contacting you or your employer. Will there be a trial? That depends on whether they accept plea agreements. The prosecutor is prepared to offer reduced sentences in exchange for full restitution to the church and formal apologies to you and your employer. And if they don't accept plea deals? Then we go to trial and they face maximum penalties for all charges. I spent the remainder of the day receiving calls from extended family members, most of whom were surprised by the arrests and perplexed about what had transpired. Uncle Henry had been working to refute Mom's story about my mental health, but the criminal charges forced everyone to consider the possibility that I had been speaking the truth all along. Clara called that evening, in tears. "Lena, I'm so sorry. I knew they were lying and manipulating, but I never imagined it would lead to arrests. You did the right thing by giving me the evidence, Clara. None of this would have been exposed without your help. But they're our parents. Seeing them in handcuffs on the local news, it's devastating." "It is devastating. But they chose to commit crimes rather than admit they were wrong. That's not our fault." "What happens to the hardware store now?" "I don't know. That's up to the courts and their creditors." 3 weeks later, my parents agreed to plea deals. Dad pleaded guilty to fraud and conflict of interest charges, and was sentenced to 2 years probation and $50,000 in reparation to Grace Community Church. Mom pleaded guilty to filing false reports and slander, and she was sentenced to 1 year probation and required to formally apologize to me and Dr. Kaplan. The hardware business is closed forever. The building was sold to cover court costs and reparations. My parents relocated to a modest apartment across town, and, according to Clara, Dad found work as a part-time employee at a competitive hardware business. I never interacted with them again, though Clara sent occasional updates. Mom had told relatives that I had destroyed the family for money, neatly ignoring her involvement in the deceit and manipulation. Dad was devastated by the loss of his business and reputation, spending the most of his time watching television and avoiding interaction with former clients and church members. The extended family separated into camps. Uncle Henry, Clara, Eric and a few cousins kept contact with me and admitted that I had been harmed. Others supported my parents or just withdrew from the matter, refusing to take sides in a disagreement that had harmed the family's public image. Layla assisted me in finding a new church where I could worship away from the daily reminders of family conflict. I continued to work at Riverside Family Services, where Dr. Kaplan's encouragement had shielded my career from my parents' sabotage efforts. My annual philanthropic giving rose in part because I was no longer concerned about how my offerings would be perceived. 6 months after being arrested, I received an unexpected letter. Grace Community Church informed me that they had developed new governance policies in response to the problems in my situation. They had established a clear distinction between financial contributors and contract vendors, implemented individual donor recognition systems, and trained staff to recognize indicators of financial abuse in families. The letter included an offer to return to the congregation, as well as a formal acknowledgement that my contributions had been unfairly ascribed to others. Pastor Reed included a personal remark at the bottom. Your courage in standing up for truth has made our church stronger and more ethical. We hope you'll consider that a positive legacy from a painful experience. I retained the letter but did not return it to Grace Community Church. Some wounds provide insight but never completely heal. Clara and Eric finally gave birth to a daughter named Emma. I took on the role of Aunt Lena, which brought me unexpected joy and reminded me that family can be chosen and made, rather than suffered out of duty. On Emma's first Christmas, Clara asked, "Do you miss Mom and Dad?" "I miss the parents I thought I had," I said to her. "But I don't miss the people they actually were." "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong?" "I think they understand they got caught. Whether they understand the deeper problems with their behavior, I doubt it." "Any regrets about how you handled things?" I thought about the question thoroughly. I regret that it had to escalate so far. I regret that they chose lies and manipulation over honesty. But I don't regret standing up for myself or exposing the truth. Even though it destroyed the family? Clara, they destroyed the family when they decided to treat me like a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. I just made their choices visible. That evening, I sat in my downtown flat, which I had redecorated after getting a minor settlement in the defamation case against the church. The place felt peaceful in a way it hadn't before, when I was preoccupied with family turmoil and church politics. I reflected on the girl who had walked into that Easter meal 2 weeks before her life imploded. She'd been foolish in some ways, believing that family meant protection and love meant honesty. However, she had also been courageous enough to raise questions when something felt wrong and powerful enough to defend herself when attacked. The trip from Easter supper to this peaceful Christmas evening had cost me a family, a church, and several months of emotional pain. But it had taught me something more valuable. That I could withstand treachery, fight for the truth, and establish a life based on my own principles rather than other people's expectations. Sometimes those who raise you to be good want you to be simple to govern. Standing up for yourself can sometimes entail breaking the illusions on which others rely. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to give in to their worst inclinations, even if they label it betrayal. I never received the apologies I had hoped for from my parents. But I got something better. The knowledge that I had operated with integrity during a difficult scenario. That insight was more valuable than any connection based on falsehoods and deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "Dinner tomorrow? I'm creating the spaghetti dish you enjoy." I smiled as I typed back, "Yes. Thank you for being my actual family." Some stories may not conclude with reconciliation or forgiveness. Some stories conclude with clarity, boundaries, and the calm satisfaction of knowing you chose the truth over comfort. It was one of those stories. I was finally at peace with it. Up next, thank you for watching. Take care. Good luck. After hearing today's story, perhaps it has prompted you to consider new questions or recalled old memories. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments spark new tales, which connect us all. Everyone's life journey is unique, and we all try to interpret the world in our own manner. These moments serve as a reminder that we are all human, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, and always learning new things. If you love this article, please share it with your friends. Your views and feedback are always valuable to us because they inspire us to create even better material. Every tale has a distinct perspective, and our goal is to comprehend everyone's point of view in order to create diverse and relatable material. Stories like these remind us that everyone's journey through life is unique, and hearing other people's stories teaches us new things. You can also share your own experiences with us. We value your experiences as well. If you enjoyed this video, please provide feedback. We strive to generate content that always brightens your mind and inspires you with fresh thoughts. If you've seen this video before, your feedback is still valuable. Every piece of input helps us enhance our material and provide our readers with a different viewpoint. Today, what we witnessed was only a fraction of the numerous stories shared on Reddit and around the world. It's a reminder that we all try to comprehend life by sharing our experiences with one another. This movie was just one example of how we try to connect with others via storytelling and learning about different aspects of life. We aim to continue sharing stories that will help us all learn and grow together. My golden sister stole $600,000 in government bonds from my safe. After federal agents arrested her, my family turned on me, calling me the villain. The security system alert pinged on my phone at 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. Someone had entered my apartment. I was 250 meters away in New York City, sitting in a classified briefing at the Treasury Department, so I knew with absolute certainty that whoever had triggered my door sensor shouldn't be there. I excused myself from the meeting, and pulled up the camera feed on my phone. The image quality was crystal clear. One of the benefits of having security clearance that required regular threat assessments was that I'd been authorized to install government-grade surveillance in my residence. My sister Natalie stood in my living room, looking around with that familiar expression of casual entitlement she'd worn our entire lives. She walked directly to my home office, barely glancing at anything else. I watched her try the office door. Pocked as always, she pulled something from her pocket. It looked like a tension wrench and pick set. Or had she learned to pick locks? It took her 5 minutes. Not bad for an amateur. The door swung open and she disappeared inside. My jaw clenched. I pulled up the office camera feed. Natalie went straight to the wall safe behind my desk, the one concealed behind the framed map of the Treasury Department's organizational structure. She'd obviously been in my office before when I wasn't home, probably during one of her surprise visits when she'd used the emergency key I'd given our parents. I watched her examine the safe's electronic keypad. She tried several combinations. Our mother's birthday, our father's birthday, her own birthday. All incorrect. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. After a moment, she held the phone up to the safe's keypad. Some kind of hacking app probably. I made a mental note to report this to building security, and update my systems. 6 minutes later, the safe clicked open. Natalie's face lit up with triumph as she swung the door wide. She reached inside and pulled out the sealed document folders I'd stored there. Her expression shifted to confusion as she examined them. These clearly weren't what she'd expected to find. I knew exactly what she was looking at. 3 folders containing bearer bonds issued by the United States Treasury. Total face value, $600,000. Protected government securities that I'd been authorized to hold as part of my work as a Treasury Department financial analyst specializing in securities fraud investigation. She couldn't possibly understand what she was holding. To an untrained eye, they probably looked like fancy certificates or maybe old stock papers. I watched her stuff the folders into her oversized purse, close the safe, and hurry out of my apartment. I sat very still for a long moment, processing what I just witnessed. Then I made 3 calls. First to my direct supervisor at Treasury, then to the Treasury Inspector General's office. Finally, to the Secret Service Financial Crimes Task Force. All 3 had the same immediate reaction. Lock down everything, report the theft through official channels, and do not attempt to recover the securities myself. Those are registered instruments, my supervisor said, his voice tight with tension. Serial numbers tracked in the federal database. If anyone tries to cash them or transfer them, the system flags it automatically. But Emma, your sister just committed a federal crime. Multiple federal crimes. You understand that? I understand. Treasury takes theft of government securities extremely seriously. This isn't something we can look the other way on. I'm not asking you to. I'm reporting a theft of protected federal instruments. Follow standard protocol. There was a pause. The response team will be thorough and fast. Good. I ended the call and returned to my briefing, though I barely heard a word of the presentation. My mind was replaying the security footage. Watching my sister systematically break into my home and steal $500,000 in government securities. Natalie had always been the golden child. Beautiful, charming, effortlessly social. In ways I'd never managed. Her parents adored her. She'd married young to a moderately successful dentist, had 2 picture-perfect children, and lived in a McMansion in the suburbs that our mother loved to brag about to her friends. I, on the other hand, had been the difficult daughter, too serious, too focused on my career, too uninterested in traditional family milestones. I joined the Treasury Department straight out of graduate school with a master's degree in forensic accounting. Spent 8 years working my way up through increasingly classified positions. My current role involved tracking international securities fraud and money laundering schemes. My family had no idea what I actually did. When they asked about my job, I gave vague answers about financial analysis and government work. They assumed I was some kind of low-level bureaucrat pushing papers in a cubicle. They'd certainly never asked why I maintained a high security clearance, or why armed federal agents occasionally showed up to conduct security interviews with my neighbors. I caught the next train back to Philadelphia, arriving at my parents' house at 7 that evening. Natalie's Range Rover was parked in the driveway, along with our parents' sedan and Uncle James's pickup truck. A family dinner. Apparently. Perfect. I used my key and walked in to find everyone gathered in the dining room. Natalie sat at her usual spot, looking radiant in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her husband, Aaron, sat beside her, checking his phone. Our parents were bringing dishes from the kitchen, while Uncle James poured wine. Emma. Mom's face registered. Surprise. I didn't know you were coming for dinner. Surprise visit? I said, keeping my voice light. I had some time off and thought I'd drive up. How wonderful, said another place. Honey. She called to Dad. It's so rare we get both our girls here together. Natalie looked up from her phone and smiled at me. That perfect practice smile she perfected in high school. Hey big sister. How's the office job treating you? Busy. You know how government work is. I really don't. She laughed and Aaron chuckled along with her. All those bureaucratic forms and procedures. I don't know how you stand it. I sat down across from her. It has its moments. How have you been? Wonderful, actually. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Aaron. We've been making some exciting financial decisions lately. Investment opportunities. Oh, I kept my expression neutral. What kind of investments? Just some securities, Aaron's financial advisor recommended. Very sophisticated stuff. Probably too complex to explain. But the returns are supposed to be excellent. My parents returned with the last of the dinner dishes. Dad started carving the roast, while Mom settled into her seat with a satisfied sigh. Natalie was just telling us about her new investments, Mom said proudly. Aaron's firm is doing so well. They're really building wealth for the future. College funds for the kids, Natalie added, reaching for her wine glass. We want to make sure they have every opportunity. That's important. I agreed. Where did you get the capital for these investments? That must require significant funds. Aaron cleared his throat. We've been saving aggressively, making smart choices. Right. Natalie's smile widened. Actually, I have to thank you, Emma. Thank me. I stopped by your apartment earlier this week. I used that emergency key Mom and Dad have. I hope you don't mind. I was in the neighborhood, and thought I'd borrow that book you mentioned. She hadn't mentioned any book. We both knew she was lying. Did you find what you were looking for? I asked quietly. I found your little safe actually behind that boring map in your office. And since you never got around to changing the combination from Mom's birthday, which is frankly terrible security. By the way, I took a peek inside. Mom and Dad exchanged confused glances. Natalie, what are you talking about? Emma's been hiding cash in a safe. Natalie laughed. Well, not cash exactly. Some kind of old bonds or certificates. They looked ancient. Probably something Grandpa left her. And since Emma clearly wasn't doing anything with them, just letting them sit there gathering dust, I figured she wouldn't mind if I borrowed them. The room went very quiet. Borrowed them? I repeated. For the college fund? Those papers were just sitting in your safe doing nothing. But Aaron's advisor says they can be cashed and reinvested for actual returns. We're helping you really. Otherwise, you just leave them there forever. She pulled the folders from her purse. She'd actually brought them to dinner like trophies, and set them on the table. See? Just some old government bonds or something. The advisor says they're probably worth a few thousand. Maybe 10,000 if we're lucky. Still nothing to sneeze at. Aaron leaned forward to examine the documents. These do look legitimate. The firm should be able to process them next week. Natalie, my voice was very calm. Did you break into my home? Don't be dramatic. I used a key. Did you force open my locked office door? She waved a hand dismissively. I learned some things from YouTube. It wasn't that hard. Did you crack my safe security system? There's an app for that. Honestly, Emma. If you're going to keep valuables, you need better protection. Anyone could have gotten in there. I looked at my parents. Dad was frowning now, starting to realize this might be more serious than Natalie was making it sound. Mom still looked confused, caught between her two daughters. You committed breaking and entering, I said to Natalie. You defeated a secured lock, compromised an electronic safe, and stole the contents. Steal? Natalie laughed. Sir, we're family. It's not stealing when it's from your sister. Besides, you clearly weren't using them. When was the last time you even looked at those papers? Last month. During my quarterly audit. Your what? I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. Those aren't old bonds from Grandpa. Those are bearer bonds issued by the United States Treasury. Current series, total face value, $600,000. They're registered federal instruments that I'm authorized to hold as part of my position with the Treasury Department. The color drained from Natalie's face. What are you talking about? I'm a senior financial analyst with the Treasury Department's Securities Fraud Investigation Division. I hold a top-secret security clearance. Those bonds in your purse are protected government securities that I maintain custody of as part of my work investigating international financial crimes. Aaron's hand froze on his wine glass. Government securities, specifically instruments used to track and identify securities fraud patterns. Each bond is serialized and registered in the federal tracking database. The moment anyone attempts to cash them, transfer them, or even verify them with a financial institution, the system automatically flags the transaction and notifies the Treasury Inspector General's office. You're joking. Natalie's voice had gone shrill. You're making this up to scare me. I reported the theft 5 hours ago to my supervisor, to the Inspector General, and to the Secret Service Financial Crimes Task Force. They've been tracking your movements since you left my apartment. The doorbell rang. Everyone at the table jumped except me. I'd been expecting this. That, I said quietly, is the response team. The doorbell rang again, followed by a loud knock and a commanding voice. Treasury Inspector General. We need to speak with Natalie Morrison. Mom's face went white. Emma, what is happening? Natalie committed multiple federal crimes. Now she's going to face the consequences. Dad stood up. I'll get the door. Dad. No. Natalie grabbed his arm. Don't let them in. Emma's lying. This is some kind of sick joke. It's not a joke. I looked at her directly. You broke into a secured residence. You defeated anti-tamper measures on a protected safe. You stole $600,000 in United States Treasury instruments. You just told this entire table that you plan to cash those instruments through a financial advisor. That's theft of government property, tampering with federal security measures, and attempted securities fraud. All federal felonies. The knocking grew more insistent. We have a warrant. Open the door now. Aaron pushed back from the table, his face ashen. Natalie, what did you do? I didn't know. Her voice cracked. How was I supposed to know she had government bonds? He works a boring office job. She never tells us anything about what she does. I have top secret clearance. I said. I can't tell you anything about what I do. That's what clearance means. Dad opened the front door. 4 federal agents in tactical gear entered, led by a woman in a Treasury Inspector General jacket. She held up her credentials. I'm Special Agent Lisa Martinez, Treasury Inspector General. We have a warrant for the arrest of Natalie Morrison and the recovery of stolen federal securities. She looked directly at Natalie. Ma'am, I need you to stand up and step away from the table. This is insane. Natalie was crying now. They're just papers. Emma's my sister. This is a family issue. Ma'am, the instruments you stole are United States Treasury bearer bonds with a combined value of $600,000. They are registered federal securities protected under 18 U.S.C. Section 641. Your theft of these instruments, combined with your stated intent to cash them, constitutes multiple federal violations. Agent Martinez's voice was professional but firm. Stand up, please. Natalie looked around wildly at our parents. At Aaron. At Uncle James. Somebody do something. She's sending me to jail over some stupid bonds. $600,000. Agent Martinez corrected in protected government securities. Not stupid. Federal property. 2 agents moved forward and pulled Natalie to her feet. She tried to jerk away, but they were professionals. Natalie Morrison. You're under arrest for theft of government property, defeating federal security measures, and attempted securities fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Emma, please. Natalie's perfect makeup was running now. Black mascara streaking down her face. I'm your sister. We grew up together. You can't do this to me. You did this to yourself, I said quietly. You broke into my home. You stole federal property. You just told everyone at this table you were planning to cash those bonds. I didn't make you do any of that. They put handcuffs on her wrists. Aaron stood frozen, staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Agent Martinez picked up the folders from the table, examining them briefly. All three are present. Serial numbers match the reported theft. She looked at me. Dr. Chin will need you to come to the field office tomorrow to verify the instruments and provide a formal statement. Of course. What time? 9 a.m. Ask for Agent Martinez. She nodded to her team, and they began escorting Natalie toward the door. My sister was sobbing now, her designer dress rumpled, her perfect hair disheveled. Mom, Dad, don't let them take me. Please. Our parents stood helpless, watching their golden child being arrested by federal agents in their dining room. Wait. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. How long? How long could she? Agent Martinez paused at the door. Theft of government property carries up to 10 years. Defeating federal security measures adds another 5. Attempted securities fraud is another 20. The U.S. attorney will determine final charges. But your daughter is looking at substantial federal prison time, 30 years. Dad's voice cracked. For taking some bonds from her sister, for stealing $500,000 in protected federal securities, sir, the Treasury Department doesn't negotiate on these charges. They can't. It would compromise national financial security. They took Natalie out to one of the black SUVs, parked in the driveway. Through the window, I watched them secure her in the back seat, still crying and protesting. The dining room was silent except for Mom's quiet weeping. Finally, Uncle James spoke. Emma, what exactly do you do for the government? I investigate international securities fraud, money laundering schemes, criminal organizations that try to manipulate financial markets. I work with classified information and handle sensitive federal instruments as part of my investigations. And Natalie just stole $600,000 in Treasury bonds that are actively tracked by federal databases. Yes. The moment she walked out of my apartment with them, the system flagged the theft. When she told her financial advisor about them, he would have been legally required to verify them with Treasury. That verification would have triggered an automatic federal investigation, even if I hadn't reported it. Aaron sank back into his chair. The advisor, oh God. When he tries to cash them, he'll be questioned as a potential co-conspirator. I confirmed. Treasury will investigate whether he knew they were stolen. If they determine he was involved in any way, he'll face charges. 2. We didn't know. Aaron's voice was hollow. I swear we had no idea she'd stolen them. She told me she'd found some old bonds in your apartment, and you'd said she could have them. That's not what happened. She broke into my home, picked my office lock, cracked my safe, and stole federal property. The security footage shows everything. Mom looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Security footage. I maintain surveillance systems in my residence. It's required for my clearance level. The footage has been turned over to the Inspector General's office. It shows Natalie's entire break-in, including the timestamps, and her techniques for defeating my locks. You were watching. Mom said slowly when she broke in. You were watching it happen. I was in Washington, D.C. for a classified briefing. I got the security alert on my phone and pulled up the camera feed. And you just watched her steal from you. You didn't call her? Didn't try to stop her? I called the Treasury Inspector General's office and followed protocol for reporting theft of federal securities. That's what I'm required to do. Dad's hands were shaking. She's your sister, Emma, your own sister. How could you let them arrest her? Over money? Over federal crimes. Dad, this isn't about money between siblings. This is about theft of United States government property. If I failed to report it, I would have been charged with conspiracy and lost my clearance. My career would be over, and I'd probably go to prison alongside her. But surely you could have worked something out. Mom pleaded. Given her a warning, told her to return them. The bonds were in her possession for 5 hours. In that time, she contacted a financial advisor and initiated the process of cashing them. That's attempted securities fraud. There's no working it out with federal charges. The law doesn't care that we're related. Uncle James rubbed his face. Jesus Christ. Natalie always did think the rules didn't apply to her. They don't usually, I said, because you've all spent our entire lives making excuses for her. Smoothing things over. Fixing her mistakes. But you can't smooth over federal crimes. The Treasury Department doesn't care that she's pretty or charming or that Mom and Dad love her more. That's not fair, Mom said sharply. We don't love her more, don't you? I looked around the table. When's the last time any of you asked about my work, my life? When's the last time you visited my apartment, or expressed any interest in what I do? You've been to Natalie's house dozens of times. I've been living in Philadelphia for 8 years, and you visited twice. The silence answered for them. Natalie assumed my work was meaningless because you all assumed my work was meaningless. She thought those bonds were just old papers, because none of you ever considered that I might have anything of value, that I might be successful, that my career might actually matter. Emma, Dad started, but I cut him off. I hold a top-secret security clearance. I make $167,000 a year. I've received 3 commendations from the Secretary of the Treasury for my work dismantling international fraud networks. Last year, I helped recover $90 million in stolen securities. But none of you know that because you never asked. Aaron was staring at me like I was a stranger. You make. Natalie told me you were probably making $40,000 or $50,000. She told you that because she assumed it, because you all assumed it, because I don't live in a McMansion or drive a Range Rover or brag about my salary at family dinners. Where does your money go? Uncle James asked, genuinely curious now. Investments, retirement accounts, charitable foundations. I live simply because I prefer it that way, not because I can't afford otherwise. But Natalie looked at my lifestyle and assumed poverty. She assumed those bonds in my safe were some forgotten inheritance rather than active federal instruments I'm responsible for protecting. Agent Martinez had returned from processing Natalie into the vehicle. Dr. Chin, one more thing. We found evidence in Mrs. Morrison's phone records that she'd been researching how to open safes for the past 2 weeks. She also made several searches about cashing old bonds and whether family members could claim them. This wasn't an impulsive decision. She planned this. The weight of that settled over the room. 2 weeks, I said softly. She spent 2 weeks planning to rob me. The U.S. attorney will use that to demonstrate premeditation. It strengthens the case significantly. Agent Martinez glanced at Natalie's husband. Mr. Morrison will need to interview you as well. You're not under arrest, but we need to establish what you knew about your wife's plans. Aaron nodded mutely. Agent Martinez left, and the room fell silent again. The trial took 8 months to reach court. Natalie's attorney tried everything, claiming she thought the bonds belonged to the family, arguing she didn't understand their value, suggesting I'd given her permission to access my apartment. None of it worked. The security footage was damning. It showed her systematically breaking into my home, picking my office lock with tools she'd purchased specifically for that purpose, using a safe-cracking app on her phone, and stealing the folders containing the bonds. Her phone records showed the 2 weeks of research. Her text messages to Aaron revealed she knew the bonds might be valuable. She'd written found Emma's secret stash might be worth serious dollars the day she'd stolen them. The financial advisor testified that she'd contacted him about old treasury bonds and asked about maximum returns with no questions asked. He'd refused and reported the conversation to his compliance department, which had flagged it with Treasury before Natalie was even arrested. The federal prosecutor walked the jury through each element of each crime. Theft of government property. The bonds were federal instruments. Natalie had taken them without authorization. They were worth over $600,000. Defeating federal security measures. She'd researched and purchased lockpicking tools. Used an app to crack the safe's electronic security. Attempted securities fraud. She tried to cash the bonds through a financial advisor, knowing they weren't hers. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 10 years in federal prison, and ordered her to pay $600,000 in restitution, plus an additional $100,000 in fines for the security violations. Natalie sobbed throughout the sentencing. Mom and Dad sat in the gallery looking 10 years older than they had 8 months ago. Aaron had filed for divorce 3 months into the trial. The judge addressed Natalie directly before imposing sentence. You didn't steal from a store or a stranger. You systematically planned and executed a theft from your own sister, targeting her specifically because you believed she was vulnerable and her work was unimportant. You violated her home, her security, and her trust. The fact that the stolen property was federal securities makes this a matter of national security, not just family drama. This court cannot and will not treat theft of government property lightly, regardless of familial relationships. Mom tried to talk to me after the sentencing. I wasn't cruel, but I was clear. She made her choices, Mom. Every single step of the way. She chose to do this. She's still your sister, and I'm still the daughter you couldn't be bothered to visit or ask about. I'm still the one whose career you dismissed as unimportant. Natalie didn't come up with the idea that my work was meaningless on her own. She learned it from you. Mom flinched. That's not fair. isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my job? When's the last time you expressed pride in anything I've accomplished? You bragged about Natalie's house, her husband, her kids. What have you ever bragged about regarding me? She had no answer. 3 years after Natalie's arrest, I was promoted to senior supervisory analyst, overseeing a team of 12 investigators working on international securities cases. My clearance was upgraded to top secret, say. The Secretary of the Treasury personally presented me with a Distinguished Service Award for my work on a case that recovered $340 million in fraudulent bonds. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. I didn't invite them. Natalie will be eligible for parole in 8 years. The restitution judgment isn't going away. She'll be making payments for the rest of her life. Her house was foreclosed. Aaron remarried. The kids live with him, and barely speak to their mother. Sometimes I wonder if she finally understands what she stole. If she's realized that her boring bureaucrat sister was actually protecting $600,000 in federal securities, as part of work that matters on a national scale. But mostly I just focus on my work. The securities markets don't care about family drama. The fraud cases don't need validation from people who can't understand them. The work just matters, and that's enough. My apartment has military-grade security now. Biometric locks, encrypted safes with tamper-evident technology, AI-monitored surveillance systems. The Inspector General's office approved the upgrades, and Treasury paid for installation. I never changed the emergency key policy though. My parents still have a key. They've never used it to visit. I'm not bitter about it. I'm just done expecting things from people who fundamentally never valued what I do. Last month, one of my investigations led to the arrest of an international fraud ring that had stolen $2 billion in securities from 6 countries. The case made headlines across financial news networks. 3 foreign governments sent official commendations. I thought about sending the news articles to my parents. Then I thought about years of boring office job. And when are you going to do something important with your life? And Natalie's doing so well. Maybe you should be more like your sister. Instead, I filed the commendations in my office and moved on to the next case. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for their family to recognize their worth. I decided to stop waiting and just keep protecting the financial security of the United States. The bonds don't need my family's approval to matter. Neither do I. Natalie writes occasionally. Letters from federal prison in West Virginia where she's serving her sentence. They start with apologies and end with requests, mostly asking if I can talk to the prosecutor about reducing her sentence, or help with her restitution payments, or write letters to the parole board. I don't respond, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons can't be learned if someone keeps rescuing you from the consequences of your choices. She spent our entire lives believing the rules didn't apply to her. That her charm and beauty and status as the favorite daughter meant she could take what she wanted without consequences. Federal prison is teaching her otherwise. And I'm teaching myself that my worth isn't determined by whether my family recognizes it. The work is enough. The cases I solve, the frauds I prevent, the securities I protect, that's enough. Some people are born into families that celebrate their success. Others have to build their validation from classified briefing to classified briefing, from commendation to commendation, until the work speaks for itself so loudly that even the doubters can't pretend not to see it. I built mine, and no one, not even family, can steal that away. Pack your bags. You have a month, my mom said. Little did they know, I had already bought the house and made it mine. My mother put her fork down and laid it flat as she was eating dinner. I had a year and a half to look for a new residence. The home had been sold by them. I was not going to accompany them. There was no prior notice, and there was no discussion. On his plate, my father fixed his gaze. My sister put on a grin. The home resounded as if I had never been there, and by the time morning arrived, their baggage had been removed. A message from my mother, questioning why I was still there, rang my phone 7 months later. The message asked why I was still there. It made me laugh. She was completely unaware of the identity of the person who owned that mansion. Tap the like and comment button on the device you're listening to if your family has forced you out of the house before I explain how this transpired. That would be me, Emily. I am 28 years old and I work in the IT industry. That appears to be rather impressive on paper. For me, this just means spending a lot of time staring at a screen for long periods of time, having iced coffee on my desk, and having a brain that never really turns off. As a rule, I have always kept my head down. There will be no large announcements or flamboyant outfits. If you were to walk by me at a grocery store, you would most likely not give me a second glance. My family has always had that perception of me as well. Someone who was able to blend in with their surroundings. From the outside, we appeared to be a typical American family. We had a respectable home, we ate dinner together on most nights, and our vacations appeared to be satisfactory in photographs. On the other hand, within that house, there was a hierarchy that was not only understood by everyone but also never spoken out loud. My mother was in charge of everything. It was the agenda, the rules, and the atmosphere of the room. She had this method of smiling that was devoid of warmth, as if affection was something that one had to earn rather than something that was owed to them. My dad only sometimes confronted her. It was not that he was unkind. Rather, he was simply missing when it mattered. He discovered something fascinating on his plate just as things were about to become uncomfortable. Aside from that, there were my sisters. Because they were still in high school, the younger one was noisy, dramatic, and accustomed to being indulged. In her early 20s, the older woman carried herself as if the world had already offered her more than she could possibly receive. They were both of the opinion that my life, my job, the fact that I was so quiet, and the fact that I never seemed to be moving anywhere, did not meet their expectations. With their voices filling the room, they were seated at the dinner table. Yours hardly made it out of my throat. From a young age, I learnt to not ask for too much. My birthdays were simple celebrations, and I would often forget about them until the late evening. If I wanted to accompany them on their vacation, it would have been prohibitively expensive, but when it was just them, it was somehow inexpensive. I spent a lot of time at home, where I oversaw the house, cleaned it, and learned how to be helpful without drawing attention to myself. I was able to secure employment after school by the time I was a teenager. However, it was not because I want additional spending money. Rather, it was because I felt like I was begging my parents for anything. The first few paychecks I received allowed me to purchase a used laptop for myself. It was no nice sight. It grumbled and caused it to overheat as if it were continually exhausted. It was, however, mine. The laptop completely altered the situation. In the middle of the night, when everyone else in the house was sleeping, I began teaching myself how to code by sitting on my bed. In a way that people had never before, lines of logic made perfect sense. After putting forth the effort, you were rewarded with results. This is not a game of guessing or bias. Nothing changed while I was still at home. I was able to pay my fair share, meet my own bills, maintain my silence, and allow them to believe whatever they desired about me. I reassured myself that it was only a transitory situation, and that if I kept my head down, I would be able to endure it for a little while longer. Simply put, I was unaware that they had already made the decision that I was expendable. The beginning of that dinner was exactly the same as the beginning of the others. There was a strong aroma of roasted chicken and pepper in the kitchen. Plating was a clink. When my mother had already made a choice and was simply waiting to reveal it, she always walked around with that tight, efficient energy that she always possessed. I sat in the same location I always did, my shoulders still tense from the previous day's work, and I told myself to eat quickly and then disappear upstairs. Once more my father cleared his throat, and then he went back to being quiet. For some reason, my sisters were leaning in close to one another, whispering to one another and laughing as if they were in on a joke that I was not allowed to hear. When my mother was about halfway through the dinner, she put her fork down. She spoke in a controlled and calm manner, saying, "I need everyone's attention." Then she turned her gaze directly toward me. "I am referring to you, Emily." Something in my chest became more constricted. The volume of her voice was not raised. She did not appear to be angry. That was the most terrible detail. The way she spoke was as if she were reading a list of groceries. A sale had been made on the residence. Formalities have been completed. They continued to move. "One day from now," I blinked. "Are you moving? Where is it?" As a response, she stated that it was pointless. "The fact that you will have to look for a new place to reside is the most important thing. It is 2 months from now." It wasn't all at once that the words came out. They were stacked. Purchased. Moving forward. "It's been 2 months. I turned my head to look at my father. He refused to look me in the eyes. His knuckles were bright white and his hands were folded on the table. The older of my sisters gave me a sly grin when I turned to face her. When she was struggling to suppress her laughter, the younger one squeezed her lips together. My question was, "Are you serious?" My mother gave a slight nod. "You will not be accompanying us anymore." She articulated it in such a clear and concise manner that it almost sounded reasonable, as if this was the natural order of things and I had simply failed to notice it. At long last my father spoke. "By now, Emily, you are an adult. You ought to have made preparations for this. My family had the intention of selling the house without informing me of their plans." A snort came from the younger one. "Perhaps you had better get started on packing," she advised. "Do you agree that positions in the technology industry don't pay very well?" It was a laugh. Not in a loud manner. There was not enough cruelty to cause a scene. To the point that it hurts. I was waiting for someone to tell me that this was over the top. If my mother were to order them to stop, and if my father were to intervene. Not a single person did. My supper sat there, unattended, and it became chilly. My eyes were experiencing that familiar pressure behind them, the kind of pressure that typically precedes tears. I forced myself to swallow it, for crying had never brought about any change in that house. With a low voice I inquired. "So that's it?" She said. "That's it?" And I agreed. They went back to eating, talking about neighborhoods and schools, and how much lighter the new place would feel once they moved in. It was as if I had already been removed from the room. "We've made our decision." I sat there until the chair I was sitting in seemed too heavy for my body. After that, I rose up, said something about being exhausted, and finally made my way upstairs. After closing the door to my bedroom, I rested my forehead against it, and listened to the sound of their laughter as it floated up the stairs. That was the moment when something within me finally underwent a change. This was no longer considered neglect. They did not show bias. Disposal was the term. And even though they believed that they had just eliminated me from their lives, they were completely unaware that they had just entered a circumstance that they were unable to manage. The following morning they departed. The low rumbling of a car engine outside my window and the sound of doors slamming shut were the sounds that awakened me up respectively. I was under the impression that I was dreaming about the entire incident for a brief moment. Next, I heard the crisp and conclusive sound of my mother's shoes hitting the wooden floor downstairs. It was like a punctuation mark. When I entered the living room, there were already a number of boxes stacked up near the entrance. The couch had been removed. The photographs of the family had been removed from the walls, leaving only colorless rectangles in the places where memories had been hung. Even though he was already halfway somewhere else, my father stood by the window with the keys in his hand. When my mother looked at me, it seemed as though she was crossing off the final item on a list. As she adjusted her coat, she whispered, "Remember. Right now, you have 2 months. Make sure that this is not more difficult than it needs to be." Who is it more difficult for? Laughing about their new rooms, their new neighborhood, and their new beginning, my sisters chugged by me as they made their way past me. I did not receive a hug from anyone. Nobody asked me if I was doing okay. The door to the front of the home was shut, and the silence that followed was immediate. It is not a peaceful silence, but rather a hollow stillness. After their vehicle vanished down the street, I remained standing there for a considerable amount of time. After their voices were gone, the atmosphere took on a distinct feel. My footsteps, my breathing, and the hum of the refrigerator were all sounds that echoed back and forth. They had not troubled themselves to take. The bookcases were empty, and the walls were barren as I made my way through the house methodically, room by room. The home I grew up in has been reduced to a shell. I was the only object that was still inside of it for some reason. When I finally felt the weight of it, that was the moment. The awareness that my family had made a clean break was not a cause for worry or dread. Rather, it was a heavy sinking reality. Neither of them had argued. They had made no reservations. They had just come to the conclusion that I was no longer worth the space that I occupied. I ignored everything that was going on around me as I sat on the floor of the living room, with my back against the wall. The majority of the time, this was the point at which I would cry, when I would blame myself, and where I would question what I had done wrong. At the same time, however, a chillier atmosphere appeared. This was not something that appeared out of nowhere, because the truth was, I had been reading through postings late one night 3 months ago, but I was only half-heartedly considering the possibility of moving out at some point in the future. When I looked at it, I saw it. My room, my address and photographs of the house I was still residing in were all set and polished to make it appear as though I did not exist. Without a single word being exchanged with me, they managed to put the house up for sale. I thought back to the time when I was staring at the screen of my laptop, feeling first wounded, then angry, and then clear. Clear in a way that I hadn't experienced in many years. They had not been confronted by me. I had not inquired about anything. Rather, "Then do it," I had called. During the time that they were preparing their future and packing their belongings, I was quietly putting something into motion, something that was legal, and something that could not be undone. I stood up and brushed the dust off my hands as I returned to the living room, which was completely vacant. The house had an excessively large and quiet size. On the other hand, for the very first time, it felt genuine. They believed that they would give up on me. One thing that they were unaware of was the fact that this was the time when I ceased being the person they could step over without facing any consequences. In addition, by the time we had our next conversation, the power dynamic would no longer be in their possession. It had been 7 months. Not in a hushed manner, not in a magical manner, but gradually. First, the house underwent a transformation, but not in a dramatic makeover show fashion. Rather, it was done on purpose. The vacant spaces were filled with brand new furnishings. Echoes were no longer heard in the living room. Once more the aroma of coffee permeated the kitchen. The reason the lights remained on throughout the night was not because I was waiting for someone else to get home. Rather, it was because I wanted them to. I also underwent a shift. I made an effort to stand more upright. I was able to sleep better. Every time my phone buzzed, I stopped flinching in response to it. They never actually showed up. Not a single time. No. How are you doing? No. Do you have a place to stay? None of it. I believe that in their opinions, I had already disappeared. The issue is with another person. It is the responsibility of another person. When I was working from home one afternoon, my phone vibrated on the desk. I was unaware of what was happening. It's Mom. I wasted more time than I should have been staring at the computer. Upon finally opening the mail, I discovered that it included only 6 words. You are still there. Why are you? No. Please don't worry about it, I'm just confused and even offended by it. It made me laugh. No, not in public. All I did was take a deep breath in through my nose. This is the kind of chuckle that makes you feel like you've finally put everything together. I failed to provide a response. A further communication arrived 1 hour after the first one. Then there was a call that was not answered. Then someone else. While I was finishing up my work, I allowed them to remain there unread. When I eventually put my laptop down, I experienced a sense of serenity and groundedness. It was about to be revealed to them, and I was not going to speed the process. I was awakened by the sound of a well-known motor pulling into the driveway on that Saturday morning. It took me a little while before I looked out the window. I was already aware of her identity. Someone rang the doorbell. Taking my time, I brushed down my sweater and took a long breath before continuing. Next, I opened the door for you. They waited there, all 4 of them, as if they were waiting to be allowed back into a location that was still theirs to begin with. The instant that my mother noticed me from behind, her smile became frozen, including the sofa, the rug, and the artwork that is displayed on the walls. The eyes of my sister raced around the room repeatedly. When the younger one said, their mouth literally opened wide. The question, what is all this, was posed by my mother as she entered the room without waiting for an invitation. At the same time, my father remained mute, his eyes remaining locked on the ground. To give the impression that she was concerned that the couch may vanish, the older sister ran her fingers over the back of the couch. The price of this item is quite high, she mumbled. I shut the door behind them and locked it. Sit, I announced, pointing in the direction of the living room. While my mother was attempting to regain her calm, she folded her hands in her lap and said, They did. Emily, she started off by saying, it is imperative that we have a conversation about what is taking place here. In my recliner, I sat back and relaxed. Could you please explain why I'm still residing in my home? Her head suddenly jerked up. You belong to me, I stated more than once. It was as if a weight had been dropped into the room. Silence. The last thing my father said was, That's not funny. I am not just joking. The smile on my mother's face was strained. That amount of money is not in your possession. I gave a shrug. The things that take place when no one is observing you will take you by surprise. The younger one laughed, scoffing. Do you mean to say that you purchased this property? Yes, in response to what the more senior individual inquired. You were almost unable to pay the rent. I cracked a grin. Quite a little bit. That is what you believed, right? The speed with which my mother stood up caused her chair to scrape against the floor. Please explain straight now. And so I did. Not every single detail. Certainly not statistics that would cause their brain to spin over. Exactly, the truth is, I was employed in the IT sector. I had been quietly constructing stuff for a number of years. I had formed a partnership with a person in whom I had complete faith. All was well with us. More than satisfactory. The listing was available to me for a number of months before you informed me that you had put the house up for sale while I was still residing in it. As a result, I came to a conclusion. The color disappeared from my mother's face. Please allow us to sell it to you. I legitimately purchased it. Everything has been organized. All of it, including payments, bills and ownership. At every passing second, the room seemed to shrink. Dad stroked his temples with his hand. If I had met his gaze, why didn't you tell us about it? Just because you did not inquire. The younger one began to participate. You ought to have assisted us if you had the financial means to do so. My mother gave her a glance before turning her attention back to me. She stated, her tone altering and becoming more gentle, that we had been experiencing some financial difficulties. What we anticipated was a lower price for the new location. It is time to pay the tuition. We could greatly benefit from your assistance. That was the case. My head slowly nodded. Permit me to rectify this situation. When you sold the house, you did not notify me about it. You informed me that I had 48 days to escape. When I inquired about the location where I was meant to go, you chuckled. And now you are requesting assistance from me. If you had known that I was useful, I said that you would have treated me differently. She insisted. We did not know. That's not fair, my father told me in a feeble voice. I stepped up and asked, isn't it? There was no quivering in my hands. At no point did my voice waver. That was the thing that startled me the most. You did not forget me by accident. You did not neglect me. You made decisions over and over again. You selected who mattered in this family. And it was not me. My mother's eyes flooded with tears. We are still your parents. No, I said you're people I'm related to. That's not the same thing. The older sister crossed her arms. So that's it. You're just cutting us off. I'm setting boundaries. The younger one started to cry. You're being cruel. I looked at her. No. I'm being consistent. I walked to the door and opened it. You should go. My mom stared at me, stunned. This isn't over. It is for me. They left the same way they had months ago. Quietly, without looking back, I locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. Justice didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt clean. And finally, the house was truly mine. They didn't disappear right away. My father left voicemails that began with apologies and ended with excuses. He said that he should have protected me more. He said that he didn't realize things were that bad. I listened to one of the voicemails, but I didn't listen to the others. My older sister sent lengthy texts about misunderstandings and family bonds. My phone lit up with missed calls and messages for weeks after that day. It was then that my aunt came by one afternoon. She brought coffee and that careful tone that people use when they think they are being kind. She told me that my parents were struggling, that they regretted their choices, and that holding on to anger would only hurt me in the long run. She said that she missed me, and that she wanted us to start over. The younger one asked for assistance in a more direct manner, asking for a new phone and wanting money for school. I did not respond to her. She nodded, even though she didn't fully understand what I was saying. After that, life settled into something calmer, and work continued to be busy. I told her the truth. I was no longer angry. Anger burns hot. What I felt was quiet and clear. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a family that had already decided that I didn't belong. Walking away was not revenge. It was self-respect. I hosted friends, and I celebrated my birthday for the first time without waiting to be remembered. There were nights when I sat in the living room, with the lights turned down low, and thought about how close I had come to believing that I was worth less than I actually was. I was not, and I had never been. Leaving the house taught me something that was simple but powerful. The moment I stopped begging to belong was the moment my life finally became mine. If this story struck a chord with you, you are not alone. Share where you are listening from and what you would have done that you would have done in my place. Family is not about who shares your last name, it is about who stands beside you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. In addition, if you are interested in reading further genuine tales about limits, betrayal, and discovering your power, make sure to subscribe so that you do not miss the next one.